In this world, rifts appear, unleashing countless monsters from secret realms. In this chaos, our protagonist transmigrates into the body of a high school student, awakening the bloodline of the king of monsters, dominating this martial world with his powers. The story began with the image of a wall on which many red banners were hung. The banners bore motivational slogans, asking whether one had ever given their all in life and reminding everyone that only 25 days remained until the college entrance exam. It was emphasized that this exam occurred only once, and that succeeding in it could lead one to soar like a dragon. At that moment, the main character suddenly opened his eyes in shock, realizing he had returned to a time before the college entrance exam. A classroom filled with studying students was shown, revealing the setting as Xia Kingdom and Changno-1 High School Grade 3 Class 7. The main character stood up abruptly, slamming his hand on the desk as his chair fell behind him. In a state of panic, he scratched his head and questioned what kind of horror story he had entered. He lamented that if reincarnation was inevitable, it should at least have occurred after getting into college. The scene transitioned to the broader context of this world. Since ancient times, humanity on Blue Star had been plagued by catastrophic secret realm invasions. Monsters emerged from these realms, using dimensional rifts to invade Blue Star. These monsters, often terrifying and immensely powerful, could destroy nations and threaten human civilization. In response, humanity developed a beast gene system, injecting beast genes into humans to awaken monster templates and unlock genetic talents. Only those who underwent this process could defend civilization. This transformation elevated warriors to a superior status in society, making martial strength the cornerstone of Blue Star's culture. Everything else was deemed inferior. At that point, a system notification appeared, announcing that the world traversal introduction was complete. The body host for the traversal was Yihi, and memories were being implanted. The main character, now reflecting while seated at his desk, identified Yihi as a high school student. A classmate then mocked him, calling him trash and noting he seemed to be having another nightmare. Another classmate joined in, ridiculing his ambition to take the college entrance exam. A cocky girl harshly suggested he drop out and become a common worker. The main character twitched in anger, recognizing the girl as the typical bitch found in every protagonist's story. He continued to think that the original owner of this body had a poor reputation. After the original Yihi's parents suffered an accident in his second year, he lost focus on both training and studies, causing his once decent grades to plummet and drag down the class average. The main character reminisced about all this. The cocky girl, noticing his gaze, angrily demanded to know what he was looking at and accused him of seeking a fight in martial arts class. The main character, pulling a disgusted face, thought he had merely been lost in thought. He reflected that although the original Yihi had been careless in his studies, he was now the one suffering the consequences, inheriting an unpopular and humiliating life. Suddenly, the bald class teacher addressed the students, asking if they were ready. He announced the beginning of the genetic modification serum injections and urged students to be confident in their 3 years of physical and martial training. He adjusted his glasses and hinted that some students had not taken their studies seriously, hinting at Yihi. Yihi silently protested that he had not been the one slacking off, but the original owner had. Still, he concluded that since he now occupied this body, he would play the part correctly and fix the mess left behind. The scene transitioned to the injection hall of Changno-1 High School. A banner on stage read Genetic Injection Conference, and multiple briefcases were placed on a table. Students whispered among themselves, speculating about which tier of monster they might awaken. One hoped for a Tier 3 Mountain Splitter or Tier 4 Sea Bridge, while another mockingly predicted a Tier 1 Beast. When the briefcases were opened, smoke emerged, revealing many gene-awakening serums. The bald teacher explained that the serum contained the primal genes of all recorded magical beasts. Upon injection, a student would randomly absorb one and awaken. Generally, a stronger physique resulted in a stronger awakened gene. The teacher, wearing a serious expression, urged students not to be nervous and calmly accept the power surge post-injection. He began calling names and students received their injections. As students were injected, their bodies reacted strongly, power coursing through them. Some fainted, others screamed. Observing this, the main character noted that the process seemed far from easy. When his turn arrived, he injected the serum into his neck and declared his resolve. His eyes widened, but nothing happened, leaving him confused. The teacher commented that Yihi didn't seem to have changed much. Yihi joked that perhaps he had received a fake dose. The cocky girl returned, laughing and pointing out that Yihi hadn't awakened anything. She came close, mocked him as a warrior without wings, and declared him doomed. She added that he should simply go home and wait to die. Yihi, angered, recognized her as one of his primary bullies. Suddenly he sensed something and questioned the new feeling. A system notification then appeared stating that the infinite monster template had been acquired. The host was Yihi. His overall physique was rank E. Martial skills included the 9th student basic chi technique, blocking palm, and iron body technique. The monster template had also been extracted. The cocky girl asked why he was pretending when he hadn't awakened. As Yihi trembled, he warned everyone to leave immediately. The students questioned his outburst. Yi, now exhaling heavily with a blue aura forming around his eyes, gritted his teeth and warned them again. A powerful surge of energy erupted from him, revealing a Godzilla-like monster silhouette. The impact sent the cocky girl and other students flying. Witnesses muttered in awe about the aura's power, with some expressing their inability to handle it. Meanwhile, a boy and girl elsewhere sensed the aura. The boy wondered if someone stronger than him was nearby. The system displayed a panel above Yi, a ranked template, Mad Flame Demola. Bloodline abilities included Scorching Breath, Molten Plus, and Spore Absorption. The advanced form, Flame Lord Demola, would unlock once compatibility reached 100%, though it currently stood at 3%. Yi, overwhelmed by the energy, declared the arrival of the ranked template Demola and the Infinite Monster template. Gazing at his hand, he asked if this was the golden finger the system had granted him. Students began to murmur, questioning whether the supposedly weak Yi had been the source of the massive aura. Some noted he had effortlessly blown everyone away. The cocky girl, now unconscious, had apparently awakened a Tier 2 magic beast, the Flame Clan Scorpion. The students wondered what kind of template Yi had awakened. All the students bowed down to Yi, who, with a calm demeanor, apologized for the dramatic awakening. He explained that he had warned everyone to step back. A speaker announcement then instructed all awakened third-year students to proceed to the testing building for evaluation. In the testing building, a gene breakthrough detection device was shown. It could assess both the magical beast gene and the martial level of a subject. Numerous virtual screens displayed student profiles. Students discussed how Li Xinyuan had awakened a Tier 3 magical beast, the Swift Spine Bug, making him the top student despite his average past. Another student, Chu Zhou, had awakened the Ice Demon Dragon, a top-tier Tier 3 bloodline, and held the title of grade's top student. A girl named Miss Liu, and a level 9 martial apprentice, had awakened the rare Stage 4 bloodline Nether Sparrow. She is the top sorcerer of the province. If the Stage 4 bloodline beast appeared in its true form, it could destroy a whole city. Only grandmasters could withstand such might. Yi, observing the profiles, noted that their templates were classified as Stage 3 or 4 while his was a class. Soon it was Yi's turn. The students reacted with anticipation, impressed by his earlier display. A girl called him her dream guy. Yi entered the gene breakthrough detection device. The students murmured among themselves, speculating about Yi's potential. One remarked that with the overwhelming aura he had just displayed, his level must be extraordinarily high. Another wondered aloud what kind of bloodline could unleash such crushing pressure upon awakening, calling it insane. A third declared excitedly that their #1 ranker was clearly undergoing a monumental breakthrough. Yet amid the chatter, one student rose from the back, his gaze fixed on Yi. The boy, observed from behind, identified Yi as someone worth watching. The virtual screen then displayed Yi's data that was limited. Yi, grade 3, class 7, martial disciple, stage 3, bloodline unknown. The students' reactions turned scornful immediately. Some laughed, mocking his low martial stage and unknown bloodline. Even the girl who had earlier called him her dream guy now expressed disappointment. They speculated that perhaps he hadn't awakened a real bloodline at all. Yi exited, comes out from the testing device, acknowledging that his template hadn't been detected. However, this triggered a prompt for the Infinite Monster template. A system notification appeared, explaining that the template could be upgraded through quests or by increasing his reputation. Additional monster templates could also be drawn this way. Though he currently had 0 draws, he smiled sinisterly, realizing that his path differed from the others. He began laughing maniacally, concluding that he would one day become the king of monsters. The scene shifted outside the high school, where the school building was shown. Inside, the bald teacher was seen talking to the main character while drinking something. Looking at the main character, the teacher asked if he wanted to take a break to study at home and return later for the college entrance exam. He questioned the protagonist about his intentions. The bald teacher then remarked that he doubted the protagonist would actually study at home. In response, the protagonist told the teacher that he genuinely wanted to improve. With resolution in his eyes and his fist clenched, he admitted that he had fallen far behind and needed to undergo special training. He emphasized that following the pace of others would leave him with no hope. The bald teacher, with seriousness in his eyes, told the protagonist that if he wanted to become a warrior, the only way was to go to college. Although he acknowledged the protagonist had awakened his bloodline, he stated that the protagonist's foundation was too weak and there was no way he would pass the entrance exam. The teacher advised him to prepare to repeat the year and try again, cautioning him not to rush. It became evident that the teacher was referring to Beijing University. Despite this, the protagonist, with stars glimmering in his eyes and determination, declared to the teacher that he was desperate to improve. He expressed that the teacher might not understand, but he had awakened a powerful bloodline. He believed that as long as he trained hard, he could definitely succeed and urged the teacher to see the sincerity in his eyes, claiming he would never lie to him. The teacher thought to himself that those eyes did indeed look sincere. However, the teacher still responded that even so, the protagonist would likely return next year to repeat the year. The scene then shifted to the Ancheng Warrior Center, where the protagonist was seen reflecting. He thought about how his parents' house had been mortgaged for 600,000 yuan, and combined with their accident compensation of over 1 million, he now had a decent amount of startup capital to improve his power. He considered his two options, to level up as a warrior or to increase the contract rate with Timura's template. According to the data in the Infinite Monster template, each template began with only 1 point of compatibility, but Timura had 3 points. He wondered where the other 2 points had come from and concluded there could only be one answer. The protagonist imagined a needle filled with blue liquid, likely the Gene Awakening Serum, and reasoned that the Timura template had absorbed the power of the Genetic Awakening Serum to gain 2 additional compatibility points. This proved to him that gene-related serums in this world could enhance template abilities. He thought that instead of training himself to death like a warrior, spending money to raise template compatibility suited him better. Imagining himself standing atop gold and piles of cash, the protagonist said that he needed to hurry up and buy a gene-enhancing serum. At that moment, he entered the turnstile and beeped his student ID card. Suddenly, he noticed something terrifying. People around him had terrifying auras. He realized that everyone there had awakened their bloodline. The protagonist reflected that after awakening the Mad Flame Dimora template, he had gained its unique sensory ability, the life magnetic field. Through this, he could sense the life signals emitted by creatures, including the burning chi and blood inside warriors and the beastly roars within their bloodlines. He then made an evil smile and admitted to himself that he could no longer suppress his fighting desire. After all, Mad Dimora was the king of beasts in its world, destined to conquer all life. Unfortunately, as a rookie, he could only suppress Dimora's fighting bloodline for now. Once stronger, he vowed to show the world what it meant to be king of beasts. Just as he was lost in this fantasy, someone called out to him saying, "Hey kid." A beautiful woman appeared, dressed neatly, taking off her sunglasses and winking at the protagonist. She told him not to peek at others so casually. The protagonist apologized, saying he didn't mean to. The woman replied that it was fine and assumed he had just awakened his monster gene, which made it normal to struggle with control. She asked what brought him to the warrior center. The protagonist explained that he was there to buy genetic medicine but couldn't find his way. He asked if she could help him. The woman noted that he was already using genetic medicine at this stage, which surprised the protagonist, who asked if there was something wrong with that. The woman, tilting her head slightly, explained that gene medicine wasn't cheap and could cause resistance, making it less effective over time. She advised that warriors usually waited until their bloodline reached a bottleneck before using it. When the protagonist asked how much one gene potion cost, the woman thought for a moment and said that, at his current stage, he could only use the solid-type beginner potion, which cost around 400,000 yuan. Hearing this, the protagonist felt his mouth go dry. He thought to himself that it was incredibly expensive, using all his savings wouldn't even allow him to afford 5. He asked the woman if she knew anyone who could get him a discount. The woman, pushing her big melons forward, took out a business card and offered it to him, saying that with a veteran warrior's referral he could get a discount. The protagonist took the card, turned back and thanked her. She replied cheerfully, "See you around if fate allows, little guy." At that moment, the protagonist steeled himself and stated that next he had somewhere else to go. He arrived at the reception of the warrior hospital and paid the treatment money for his parents. Then he visited a weapon shop and bought a weapon, thinking that he had spent an insane amount of money. The scene shifted to his house at sunset. In his room, the protagonist was surrounded by a terrifying blue aura and overwhelming power. A system notification panel appeared, stating that the compatibility of the Mad Flame Dimora Beast template had risen from 3% to 4% and then to 7%. It was evident that he had taken many gene potions via injection. Another system notification appeared, stating that his overall status had improved from 8 to 10 and then from 10 to 15, making him in martial arts level 7. Covered in sweat and exhausted, the protagonist remarked that this was what leveling up felt like. He excitedly exclaimed, "Hell yeah," and noted that with each shot of gene potion his physique improved, but the last one showed only a small increase. He realized that as his body strengthened, base mutation became harder to trigger. Still, he was satisfied. What others gained in 3 years, he achieved in just minutes using his base physical stat. He thought that if activating Dimora's bloodline power gave him an edge, he might really have a shot at being the top scorer in the exam. Looking at himself with excitement in his eyes, he remarked that if cheat mode couldn't beat the geniuses, then this cheat was too weak. Now he had one mission, to depart for the secret realm. It was explained that secret realm rifts were ranked from S to E, with higher ranks containing stronger beasts. Beasts in S-class realms were uncontrollable and their invasion into the real world would spell disaster. The scene shifted again to a bright sunny day, where the protagonist, geared up for an outstanding trip, approached an E-level secret realm. He noted that there were fewer people than expected, possibly because the realm had been long developed and any treasures were already taken. Only weak beasts remained for rookie warriors to train against. Approaching the reception, the protagonist greeted a man watching TV and informed him he had booked a ticket for Secret Realm number 3. Without looking away from the screen, the man told him to sign the death waiver and handed him the ticket. The scene transitioned to a circular, shimmering blue portal. Standing in front of it, the protagonist recognized it as a secret realm rift, and smiling with excitement, declared this as the beginning of his rise to become King of Beasts. He then jumped and entered the rift. Landing on the other side, the protagonist found himself surrounded by massive planets, Kanglan Star, Anwei Star, Taijin Star, and marveled at the sight, stating that although he had seen pictures in textbooks, seeing the secret realm in person was truly magnificent. Surrounded by various trees, he was unaware of a creature approaching from behind. He remarked that he couldn't even see a steady sky in this realm. At that moment, a red creature, a first-ranked beast called Bladefang Rabbit, crept up behind him. However, the protagonist sensed it, smiled, and when the rabbit attacked, he dodged and caught it by the ear, looking at it menacingly. He called the rabbit a fool for thinking he hadn't sensed it. Using his template ability Life Magnetic Field, he smashed the rabbit's head with one hand, destroying its body. Looking at the magic core he gained from Bladefang Rabbit, he noted its average quality and estimated its worth at around 1,000 yuan. He was impressed with the efficiency, remarking that he had earned in minutes what others worked a whole month for. However, he thought that collecting too many first-ranked beast cores was pointless, and that it would be better to find a second-ranked beast. Unbeknownst to him, a jointed, snake-like monster with tentacles and an ugly mouth approached from behind. A system notification identified the second-ranked beast as a demon corpse bug. Excited, the protagonist smiled evilly, his pupils glowing blue, and while sheathing his dagger declared, "Speak of the devil, and the devil is here." The scene opened in Ancheng No 3 E-Class Secret Realm, where the protagonist was seen fighting the demon corpse bug with his short sword. As the battle raged, green blood from the monster splattered around. Observing the monster turning, the protagonist slightly tilted his head and noted that he had read the monster encyclopedia. He mentioned that compared to the steel-like shell on the monster's back, the soft armor on its abdomen was clearly easier to break through. At that precise moment, the demon corpse bug began rotating, using its tough shell to launch an attack. In response, the protagonist gathered blue energy in his hand and announced his technique, Martial Arts Hyper Beam. A glimmering blue beam shot out from his hands, piercing through the monster. However, just then, the demon corpse bug retaliated with 2 projectile attacks. The protagonist was momentarily stunned and realized that the creature's mandibles could fire projectiles. Despite the surprise, he swiftly dodged both, though his outfit suffered a tear. He complained about the damage, asking the bug if it knew how expensive the outfit was, clearly agitated. Still analyzing the situation, the protagonist admitted that, at his current martial artist level, he couldn't defeat the bug without powerful martial techniques, even with deep Danshin energy and strong blood vitality. He could barely exert 50% of his strength and blamed the academic failure of the original body's owner. With no other option, he decided to cheat and activated his madamada, Emperor's demon bloodline. As nerves bulged on his face and his eyes glowed blue, his hands transformed into that of madamola's, resembling a powerful, clawed Godzilla-like limbs. His empowerment stat rose from 15 to 21. As the corpse bug opened its mouth to attack, the protagonist lunged forward, slashing its body. He moved so quickly that only the trail of blue energy he left behind could be seen. Using his claws, he tore the demon corpse bug apart. Eventually, the lifeless body of the creature lay before him, green blood splattered across the scene. After landing, the protagonist transformed his hands back to normal. Looking at the body, he stated that with his physique now at 21 points, he had completely crushed the Tier 2 corpse demon bug. Upon deactivating his transformation, he noted the need to expel excess heat from his body, comparing the sensation to that of a jet engine. Smoke visibly emanated from him. Turning to his short sword, he observed its corrosion due to the bug's venom and lamented the loss, complaining about the poor quality of a 250,000 yuan weapon that couldn't withstand a Tier 2 monster. Frustrated, he gave a bad review in his thoughts. At that moment, his stomach growled. He attributed it to the energy drain from his first monster hunt and lamented not bringing any food. Suddenly, he smelled something fragrant. Curious, he noticed the magic core of the demon corpse bug, which was green-gray and emitted a tempting aroma. Without hesitation, he gulped it down, declaring that he didn't care. Upon ingestion, a system notification panel appeared, indicating that compatibility with the monster template. Madamada Emperor's demon had increased from 7% to 7.3%. The protagonist was surprised and remarked that his compatibility increased after consuming the magic core. Smiling, he noted that while he had spent hundreds of thousands on genetic potions to gain a mere 1% increase, the single green core had boosted it by 0.3%. He deduced that 3 or 4 such cores equaled 1 potion and estimated that white magic cores from Bladefang Rabbits might boost it by 1%. Moved by this realization, he cried tears of joy and admitted he had wasted money on pay-to-win methods. Refocusing, he placed 2 fingers on his forehead, channeling energy into them and resolved to hunt to his heart's content that night. Activating his life field, he began scanning for nearby monsters. By the next afternoon, his stats showed 9% compatibility and an overall physique of 15.8, indicating he had hunted many monsters. Emerging from the Secret Realms portal, he realized that further consumption of white magic cores wouldn't increase compatibility and decided to sell them. At the reception, he poured out many magic cores from his bag and informed the receptionist that he had 20 white magic cores and 1 green core. Shocked, the lady questioned if a mere high school student had really collected so many. Stunned by the sight of the cores, she watched him walk away happily. The protagonist stated that, according to government regulations, martial artists must submit a tenth of their loot, which meant handing in 5 white magic cores. He had earned 200,000 credits from the hall, and it was now 9 days until the college entrance exam. The scene shifted to Ancheng No. 4 D-Class Secret Realm, where a group of people gathered, one seated in a jeep. The driver addressed Captain Lin, expressing hope that they would finally complete the Blood Jade Flower bounty mission. Captain Lin confirmed they had previously located the flower, but since Old Chen was injured by a monster, he couldn't join the mission. A woman in the group asked if that meant they only had 5 members, and a man noted the rule requiring at least 6 to enter a D-Class realm. Captain Lin reassured them by pointing to a man in a hoodie, explaining he had contacted an agency to find a new martial artist. The system identified them as martial artist Lin He, a Tier 2 martial artist. The hooded figure was revealed to be the protagonist. Captain Lin confirmed that he was martial disciple level 9 and asked if his name was Dadsla. The protagonist casually affirmed this while picking his nose and giving a 2-finger salute. He internally noted that, as a student not qualified to enter a D-Class secret realm, he had used an illegal agency to fabricate an identity, which cost him 100,000 credits. A ripoff. Captain Lin found the name Dadsla odd, but the protagonist quipped that using his real name would violate copyrights. Captain Lin dismissed it, saying it was just a code name. He then commented that the protagonist's level didn't truly qualify him for a D-Class realm, so he should observe and not hinder the team. The protagonist agreed and appreciated the clear expectations set before the mission, preferring it over unexpected betrayal. The team boarded the jeep and drove into the rift portal, determined to find the Blood Jade Flower. Inside the realm, they tracked the flower to an oasis ahead, guarded by a Tier 2 monster. The protagonist observed that the previous realm had been a rainforest while this one was a desert, concluding that secret realms weren't linked to a single world. Suddenly, Earth Demon rats began chasing the jeep. One member alerted Captain Lin, who instructed Hood to eliminate them. Hood acknowledged the order and with a fierce gaze hurled mini blades at the rats. The blades pierced their heads, causing blood to splatter. Hood continued the assault, effectively neutralizing the threat, blasting them away. The protagonist noted that infusing martial energy into the blades made them explode like bombs. He observed that Hood was ruthless and not very talkative. The scene shifted to the desert oasis. As the party walked, the protagonist questioned Captain Lin about not driving further. Lin explained that the monsters in the oasis were highly sensitive, and the jeep's engine noise would alert them while walking. Captain Lin began assigning roles. Xiao Zia was to throw a stun grenade to lure out the beast, Xiao Wu and Hood were to set up traps, and Old Liu was to provide suppressive fire. Lin would take the front line and told the protagonist to merely observe. The protagonist agreed nonchalantly, placing a hand on his head. Xiao Zia launched the stun grenade into the oasis, and it exploded, releasing pheromones to provoke territorial beasts. This lured out a Tier 2 Earth Dragon whose grotesque face and protruding tongue were revealed. Meanwhile, the scene shifted again to a silhouette of a bald big man walking through the desert. Before him lay the mini blades previously thrown by Hood. The bald man picked one up, licked it, and smiled wickedly. In the secret realm near the oasis, it was seen that Captain Lin had beheaded the Earth Dragon monster. The party members called out to Captain Lin and ran towards him, one of them exclaiming that the Earth Dragon was dead. Captain Lin was seen sheathing his sword and smiling as he looked at them, then said they should keep moving forward. At that very moment, the Earth Dragon raised one of its arms, attempting to attack Captain Lin with its giant claws. The party members shouted a warning for Captain Lin to watch out, but just then the protagonist disappeared. He soared into the sky above the monster and unleashed his mountain-crushing heavy fist. The impact was so massive that debris and dust followed everywhere. Captain Lin was shocked that someone who was just a martial novice had the power to shake a Tier 2 beast. A woman in the party commented on the power of the punch, and the other party members began praising the protagonist. Our protagonist clapped the women up. "Oh, sorry." The woman clapped her hands and told him that his mountain-crushing heavy fist had taken the monster down. A big guy in the party mentioned that he had killed a Tier 2 magical beast, but the protagonist casually responded that it was no big deal. Captain Lin then thanked the protagonist for saving him and declared that from now on they were companions. At that moment, Captain Lin removed something from the Earth Dragon's body. It appeared to be a fruit. The big guy in the group said they also collected the Earth Dragon's soul essence this time. The woman remarked that the red shiny item was worth a great deal. The protagonist, drooling, commented that whatever it was, it looked like a large fruit and added that if he ate it, it could greatly improve his template. Captain Lin acknowledged that it had been a close call but believed they had defeated the dragon and found the blood. However, before he could finish, Hood stabbed him in the back. With a terrifying glare, Hood laughed and said there was no point in thinking about it now. Captain Lin was shocked. The party members cried out to him in alarm. Old Liu asked what was going on as Hood backed away. Captain Lin turned to Hood and questioned his actions. At that moment, a large figure appeared beside Hood and stating it was obvious he was doing something to strike it rich. It was revealed that the large bald man was Huo Peng. One of the party members shouted in recognition that it was Huo Peng. The protagonist, surprised, asked the big guy in the group if they knew this bald man. The big guy explained that Huo Peng robbed martial artists of the loot they found in the secret realm, and that now Huo Peng had set his eyes on them. Old Liu was seen supporting the injured Captain Lin, who stated that Hood's blades were poisonous. Captain Lin called Hood a traitor and questioned how he had found the location. He mentioned that even his teammates had only learned the location of the blood jade flower after entering the secret realm. Captain Lin questioned who had leaked the information. The protagonist recalled the darts that Hood had thrown at the earth demon rats. He realized that the blades had formed a trail. Confronting Hood, the protagonist accused him of embedding information in the blades. Hood, with an evil and terrifying look, acknowledged that the protagonist was pretty smart. Hood taunted, suggesting that the protagonist should head back to school since college entrance exams were coming up, and accused him of walking hand in hand with death. Angered, the protagonist retorted that the exams were indeed coming and that he had a top scorer title waiting for him. At that moment, Hood fired a mini blade at the protagonist, calling him arrogant. The protagonist stopped the mini blade with just 2 fingers, gave Hood a menacing look, and called him a disgusting dog barking in front of him, declaring that that was true arrogance. Still enraged, the protagonist remarked that it was too noisy to talk with him and that it was time to take out the trash. Huo Peng, amused, commented that the protagonist was an interesting kid and declared that he wanted the kid's head. Hood then launched multiple mini blades at the protagonist, which shimmered with orange light. At that moment, the protagonist activated his Mad Demola bloodline, causing all the mini blades to shatter instantly. The party members warned the protagonist that Hood had disappeared. They told him to be careful, and one shouted that Hood was above him. Hood was about to land a kick on the protagonist. The protagonist thought it was the perfect chance to try out his new martial technique, Mountain Splitter. He gathered energy on his forehead through his 2 fingers and unleashed a blue beam of energy at Hood in midair, piercing him. Captain Lin was shocked that Hood had been taken out with just 1 move and questioned whether the protagonist was really just a martial novice. Hood landed on the ground lifeless, while the protagonist casually blew air from his smoking finger. Huo Peng, the bald man, then remarked that this was a gene technique and asked which great family the protagonist was from. A terrifying silhouette of a Godzilla-like monster appeared behind the protagonist as he stated that he was from the Dimora clan. He asked if Huo Peng was planning to beg for mercy. Enraged, Huo Peng declared that even with gene techniques, the protagonist couldn't bridge the massive martial gap. He released a terrifying purple aura and glared at the protagonist with a dead stare. Then Huo Peng activated his bloodline ability, Tyrant Terror Blackbeard, transforming into a monstrous form. A giant beard silhouette appeared behind him. Huo Peng, now with a huge monster-like physique, used his martial technique Pierce Shaker and lunged at the protagonist. As he squatted, the protagonist declared he would go for Huo Peng's leg first and released a blue beam of martial energy at it. Huo Peng growled in pain, screaming about his leg. Despite the injury, Huo Peng did not give up and attempted to crush the protagonist with both hands. The protagonist dodged and Huo Peng leapt again. The protagonist thought that second-tier martial artists were formidable, noting that even his atomic breath couldn't melt Huo Peng's ankle bore. Huo Peng managed to trap the protagonist in his massive hands, and the resulting shockwave from the attack roared through the secret realm. However, the protagonist escaped and appeared behind Huo Peng with a terrifying look, asking if he was done and declaring it was now his turn. Right at that moment, we see our protagonist charging his blue aura in his fist and using the core-infused, mountain-crushing fist, throwing multiple fast punches, defeated Huo Peng. We see that our protagonist stood billowed in smoke after beating the hell out of Huo Peng. At that moment, Huo Peng reverted to human form and lay on the ground defeated. Captain Lin and the party members were left pondering how strong the protagonist truly was. The beaten and bruised Huo Peng, lying down, accused the protagonist of using a gene technique that emitted toxic gas. He called the protagonist despicable and said wicked martial artists like him would be punished. He cursed him. The protagonist, unfazed, gave him a death stare, his eyes expressing murderous intent. He gathered martial energy in his fist and stated that people cursing him just kept piling up. He questioned Huo Peng, calling him a baldy. The scene shifted to the Central Sports Stadium of Anchang City on the day of the martial entrance exam. An airship was seen advertising the college entrance exam, accompanied by a small plane doing the same. A message appeared on the blimp as it stepped onto the stage with confidence. The small plane carried a flag wishing all learners to achieve gold. At that moment, the host of the entrance exams made an announcement. The host greeted the students and stated that the General Higher Martial Arts School enrollment was about to begin. He wished everyone good luck in martial arts and explained that the college entrance examination adopted a competition system, where candidates would compete in pairs and the winner would advance to the next round. Behind the host, people were seen cheering for the examination, including an old man with a serious look in his eyes. The host continued by stating that the exam would last 3 days. The first 2 days would be auditions, and those who advanced would take the exam on the 3rd day. Each student would fight 3 matches in the auditions, and the successfully promoted students would continue competing until the top scorer was selected. With excitement, the host addressed the students, stating that the prospects they carried were the future of humanity, urging them to show their true potential for both themselves and humanity. He then officially announced the beginning of the Anchang City Higher Examination. The scene transitioned to Arena Number 1, where martial artists were engaged in combat. In Arena Number 4, a female martial artist was fighting a man, while in Arena Number 6, only one girl was present. The commentator expressed confusion, noting that the audition for the Number 6 ring had encountered a problem as one candidate had not yet arrived. The commentator, seated in front of a ring light and multiple phones, revealed that the 2 contestants were Huang Tongtong and Yihe, the protagonist from Anchang City Number 1 Middle School. Only Huang Tongtong was in the ring, and according to the rules, if Yihe did not show up after the competition began, he would be considered to have forfeited. The scene shifted to Huang Tongtong, who appeared displeased and arrogant. She expressed that being made a fool of during the genetic conference was the biggest embarrassment of her life, and that she had planned to use her fire lizard to humiliate Yihe. A fire lizard was seen wrapped around her body as she lamented that Yihe had hidden and dared not come out, calling it a bummer. The audience shared her displeasure. A woman in the audience called him a coward, questioning whether he even dared to attend the college entrance exam. A boy suggested that he must be shivering in bed, and another man remarked that such a coward shouldn't even go to high school, suggesting he should sweep the streets instead. The referee then signaled with a whistle that time was up, announcing that Yihe from Anchang City Number 1 Middle School had abandoned the match. However, before he could finish, 2 old men noticed something unusual. The bald old man remarked that something was coming, while the bearded one observed a massive orb approaching. A blue object with black smoke trailing behind it was seen heading toward the examination site. The bearded old man questioned if it was a person, realizing it was none other than the protagonist. He continued in astonishment, asking what kind of power allowed protagonist to fly in the sky. The protagonist landed in front of Huang Tongtong amidst a shimmering blue light. Huang Tongtong covered herself due to the smoke from his landing and questioned what was going on. Suddenly, a foot approached her face, and she was shocked as the protagonist kicked her with such force that she went flying. The protagonist commented that it was a close call and that he nearly had to return next year due to being late for the exam. Huang Tongtong was shown unconscious with saliva dripping from her mouth. The referee announced Yihe's victory. Yihe remarked with surprise at how easy it had been. The audience erupted in cheers. One praised the protagonist for defeating his opponent with a single kick, while another admired his dramatic entrance. Someone questioned whether this was the mythical kick from the sky. A system notification panel appeared, revealing the protagonist's overall fitness was 226, with a monster template of Savage Trace and Dimora, and compatibility at 20%. Yihe reflected that Captain Lin had given him the blood jade fruit from the Earth Dragon to thank him, though it had taken time for the fruit to enhance his physique. Turning to the audience, he declared that they could now relax and enjoy what came next. The protagonist's next match was against Long Tao, whom he defeated easily with a kick. The referee announced protagonist's victory in the match between him from Number 1 High School and Long Tao from Number 4 Middle High School. The protagonist won another match with a kick, securing victory once again. The audience continued to cheer, calling him incredibly strong. One noted that every battle ended with one kick, never dragging on. Another dubbed him a one-kick Superman. Protagonist raised his hand in acknowledgement of his victories, having advanced to the 3rd round after winning all 3 matches. After the fight, someone approached the protagonist, inviting him to learn more about Dongshan University. A lady asked him to add her on the WeChat app. Another man emphasized that although their university was private, they offered generous grants and scholarships. A man with glasses stated that their university needed a strong warrior like him. Someone else asked if he had a favorite university. The protagonist appeared overwhelmed by the flood of offers from many universities. When asked about his favorite university, the protagonist confidently replied that he wished to enter Huadu University. Following this, the people around him walked away. A girl remarked that he was arrogant for choosing Huadu and predicted he would seek their help after being slapped in the finals. Another man told him to remember to contact them if he failed. The protagonist twitched, thinking that none of them believed he could do it. However, he acknowledged that it wasn't entirely their fault since Huadu University was the best martial arts university in Xia country and among the top 5 globally, a revered institution for martial artists. Smiling deviously, the protagonist noted that only the top few from a second-tier city like Anchang City could hope to enter that sacred place. He decided to prove them wrong by winning first place. At that moment, 2 men in black suits resembling bodyguards approached Yihe, requesting his cooperation to re-evaluate his martial arts level. Yihe simply looked at them, and moments later, the bald man shouted in surprise upon discovering that Yihe was at the 9th martial arts level, even though he had previously been only at level 3. The protagonist looked at the device used for measurement, questioning how such rapid improvement in just 3 months was possible. He suspected that they were implying he had cheated. The bald man revealed that they had discovered the protagonist frequently visited the E-level secret realm after school and asked why he had gone to such a dangerous place before the exam. With glimmering eyes and some tears, the protagonist revealed that before his father passed away, he had told him that to surpass humanity, he must no longer be human. The protagonist had ventured into the secret realm repeatedly, ultimately breaking through his genetic lock. The bald man and his companion were shocked. The bald man, sweating, exclaimed in disbelief. The two men quickly ran off, declaring they had to report the matter immediately. The protagonist, watching them, wondered if he had somehow become an important observation target. The scene shifted to our protagonist observing his phone, watching several live streams. In one, a man wished his son well. In another, a woman encouraged someone. A woman told her loved one to simply do their best, while another man mentioned throwing a banquet for old Wang if he passed the double first-class exam. The protagonist, observing the interviews and messages, noted that there were even live streams interviewing parents and friends of examinees. However, sadness overtook him as he realized there was no one cheering for him. He acknowledged that he was truly an orphan without anyone who cared. The scene then shifted to our protagonist's classroom teacher, who was seen watching the protagonists fight and cheering for him. The promotion round began, introducing the protagonist's new opponent, Luo Xuan. The audience murmured upon hearing his name, recalling he was the top student from number 3 middle high school. Luo Xuan, a martial arts 8th-level fighter with a 2nd-level magical beast bloodline, came from a family of warriors. Many believed his opponent was doomed. The protagonist told Luo Xuan that he could have the first move. Luo Xuan, irritated, asked if the protagonist knew who he was. The protagonist replied that regardless of whether he did or not, the outcome wouldn't change. Luo Xuan activated his bloodline surrounded by a greenish-blue aura. He agreed with the protagonist, stating the outcome would be his victory. Using the martial art technique Dashing Lightning Claw, Luo Xuan lunged at the protagonist midair, warning that if the protagonist's luck wasn't good, he would die. As the claw approached, he calmly noted that while Luo Xuan's momentum was strong, it was nothing compared to the force of the bald old man. The protagonist is talking about Huo Peng. The protagonist caught Luo Xuan's clawed hand midair. Luo Xuan, now fearful, exclaimed about his hand. In the next moment, Yi struck Luo Xuan with a trail of blue energy emanating from his hand. The impact was so strong that the ground beneath Luo Xuan was torn apart and he was smashed onto the ground. Yi, now smiling, questioned whether there were any decent examinees at all. The referee then announced the protagonist's victory. The commentator announced that there had been another instant knockout, this time with the seeded contestant Luo Xuan being defeated. The audience expressed confusion, murmuring that Luo Xuan had appeared so powerful. They questioned why he was lying on the ground so suddenly. The fight between the protagonist and Luo Xuan had been live-streamed, with viewers in the comments section praising the protagonist. They described him as calm as a cloud and steady as the breeze, calling it the mark of a true master. One commenter noted that his skill existed on a completely different level from the other examinees, with a gap that was simply too vast. A girl in the comments expressed admiration, calling him cool and exclaiming that she wanted him to make her pregnant. The scene shifted to the cheering crowd in the stadium. Someone in the crowd remarked that although the protagonist used his hands this time, it still counted as a one-hit knockout. A woman commented on his strength, calling him one-kick man. Another voice from the crowd expressed admiration and support, predicting that the protagonist would make it to the finals. Luo Xuan's defeated body was carried away on a stretcher. A boy wearing a blue jacket observed the protagonist and acknowledged him as the one he had set his sights on. He declared that he would defeat him in the final round. In the live broadcast room of Huadu University's admission office, a man watching the live stream on a large screen instructed that all information on the protagonist be gathered within 30 minutes. The staff in the room responded affirmatively. The scene then shifted to another arena where the second group's advancement matches were underway. A girl with orange hair posed confidently, addressing her opponent Miss Liu and expressing her disdain for her robotic expression. The orange-haired girl was introduced as Kai Xiaoling, known as the Queen of Ancheng's second senior high. Her opponent Miss Liu stood expressionless and was introduced as Liu Qingzhu, the unattainable flower of Ancheng first senior high. Spectators commented on how enjoyable it was to watch beautiful girls fight. The referee blew the whistle and announced the beginning of the match. As the match started, Kai Xiaoling leapt towards Miss Liu midair, attempting to kick her and taunting her to drop the act. Miss Liu responded by using her martial skill, the Liu family secret art, Sutra of Transient Splendor. A blue-greenish aura surrounded her hand in a circular motion and she stopped Kai Xiaoling's kick. Kai Xiaoling flipped backward and landed on the ground. Without wasting a moment, she used her martial skill Howling Gale Step to close the distance between them and urged Miss Liu to get serious. Believing she had found an opening, Kai Xiaoling attacked, only to realize she had fallen into a trap. Her hand was caught in the swirling air currents created by Miss Liu, leaving her unable to pull free. At that moment, Miss Liu launched an attack called the Xuanwang martial skill, Primordial Chaos Finger. Her face bore a menacing expression as she delivered the strike, her hand glowing with a green aura. Seeing this, Kai Xiaoling was shocked. The commentator exclaimed that a candidate had actually mastered a Xuanwang technique, noting that with such martial talent, Miss Liu didn't even need the exam to prove herself and could gain direct admission to Huadu University. Kai Xiaoling, however, did not retreat. She activated her bloodline awakening, calling forth the Shadow Claw Tiger King. A menacing tiger silhouette appeared behind her, and her body transformed with black stripes like a tiger, orange hair resembling tiger fur, eyes of a tiger, and legs that transformed into a tiger's limbs. The commentator revealed that she had awakened a third-tier royal bloodline. Kai Xiaoling stepped back to dodge Miss Liu's previous attack. The commentator remarked on the difficulty of controlling royal bloodlines, especially the ferocious Shadow Claw Tiger, and stated that Kai Xiaoling's future was limitless. Now transformed, Kai Xiaoling glared at Miss Liu and demanded to see her Nether Phoenix bloodline. Miss Liu responded calmly, saying that this was enough. Angered, Kai Xiaoling shouted back and lunged at Miss Liu, questioning whether anyone below martial artist level could challenge her. She attacked, but Miss Liu countered with the Liu family secret art, Transient Splendor Phantom. Kai Xiaoling followed up with her martial skill, Fierce Tiger's Grippling Kick, directing a powerful kick towards Miss Liu. But just then Miss Liu used Primordial Chaos Jade Finger. Her eyes glowed purple, and with a single finger shimmering in green light she stopped the oncoming kick. When the kick and the finger collided, the arena was engulfed in a dust cloud from the impact as their martial energies clashed with immense force. The crowd was stunned, anxiously waiting to see who would emerge victorious. As the dust settled, Kai Xiaoling was seen standing alone. The commentator announced her as the one still standing, but then noticed exhaustion in her eyes. Moments later, Kai Xiaoling collapsed. The commentator then declared that Kai Xiaoling had fallen due to exhaustion, and Liu Qingzhu remained standing in the arena. He continued by noting that Liu Qingzhu had overwhelmed Kai Xiaoling using only martial techniques, despite both being at the 9th stage of martial disciple and Kai Xiaoling having awakened a royal bloodline. He praised Liu Qingzhu as a once-in-a-century genius and confirmed her victory. Livestream comments erupted in admiration. One called Liu Qingzhu too strong and legendary, declaring her the top scorer of Anchang City. Another questioned if the commenter knew what bloodline she had awakened, a 4th-tier Nether Phoenix. Further comments expressed awe at her strength, noting that most martial artists wouldn't stand a chance against her. The scene changed again, revealing the top 8 advancement tournament draw ceremony. Many bowls were placed on a table. The protagonist approached one of them and pulled out a ball. The commentator announced that it was now the turn for Anchang First Senior High's protagonist. The ball drawn by the protagonist read Group A. At that moment, a tall, muscular man approached and remarked with a smile that he was also in Group A, indicating they would be opponents. He introduced himself as Shen Guan from Qingfeng Private High. The protagonist introduced himself in return, stating that he was from Anchang First Senior High. Shen Guan pointed at the big screen and noted that they were scheduled for the second match. He suggested they watch the first one. The commentator announced the first match between Luo Zai and Chu Zhou. While watching, Shen Guan commented on Luo Zai's strength, explaining that Luo Zai had repeated a grade to improve his chances of entering Huadu University. Despite his polished bloodline control, he couldn't stand a chance against Chu Zhou, who defeated him. The protagonist questioned who Chu Zhou was. Shen Guan explained that Chu Zhou was also from the protagonist's school and asked if he really didn't know him. The commentator then confirmed Chu Zhou as the winner of the first match. The scene shifted to the principal of Qingfeng Private High School, who cursed Luo Zai for losing right at the start. Back with the protagonist and Shen Guan, the protagonist asked how Luo Zai compared to Shen Guan. Shen Guan replied with a smile that he was the martial arts club president for the senior level at Qingfeng Private High School. He stated that even his 2 teammates together couldn't defeat him. However, his expression turned serious as he admitted that the protagonist was the only real threat in this year's exam. From Shen Guan's point of view, he revealed that he had unusually sharp senses since childhood and could sense that the protagonist was like a dormant volcano with a beast inside, ready to erupt at any moment. He imagined the protagonist as a volcano ready to explode. Shen Guan then smiled and pointed toward the arena, saying that it was their turn now. The second match between Shen Guan and the protagonist began with both of them facing off with intense determination, ready for an exciting showdown. The commentator stated that the competition had intensified, with the top 8 contestants battling to become the final 4 in the Anchang City College entrance examination. The fight between the protagonist and Shen Guan was underway, and energy crackled fiercely around them. The commentator continued, noting that both Shen Guan and the protagonist were equally strong. Their clash generated such immense energy that the audience was forced to shield their faces from the force. During the battle, Shen Guan was seen smiling despite a nosebleed. He remarked sarcastically, questioning if a nosebleed was a bloodline ability. At that moment, Shen Guan gazed menacingly at the protagonist, enveloped by a blue-blackish aura. He declared that it was truly mysterious to be able to directly target cells for destruction. The protagonist, also looking at Shen Guan with a fierce expression, thought to himself that Shen Guan had used martial energy to create a barrier over his body, effectively shielding himself from external nuclear radiation. It became evident that the blue-blackish aura surrounding Shen Guan acted as a barrier. The protagonist's eyes glowed blue with determination as he admired Shen Guan's martial art, thinking that Shen Guan was truly a formidable opponent. A silhouette of a giant snake emerged behind Shen Guan, slithering along his arm, as he announced that he would now showcase the martial arts passed down through generations in the Shen family. Shen Guan then unleashed his technique, Shapewell Fist, forming his fists and gathering energy. He followed this with another martial art Deer Peak. Observing this, the protagonist noted the incredible speed of the attack. In a flash, Shen Guan appeared before him and landed a powerful punch to the gut, causing the protagonist to cough up blood. The commentator commented on the sheer power of Shen Guan's Shapewell Fist. The protagonist was sent flying by the force of the attack, yet Shen Guan gave him no respite, charging forward and shouting that escape was impossible. He launched another attack, Bear Crash, which the protagonist noticed in time to shield himself with his hands. Despite defending, the protagonist realized that Shen Guan's attack was not merely physical. It was enhanced with martial energy, causing double the damage. He reflected that his previous opponents had been weak and inexperienced. Suddenly, Shen Guan's hand transformed into a snake-like structure and coiled around the protagonist. In an instant, Shen Guan appeared behind him, grabbed him tightly, and stated that not only could he inject martial energy into his body, but he could also lock his opponent's martial energy, rendering them unable to use their skills. The protagonist was completely restrained. Seizing the opportunity, Shen Guan used his martial art, Ape Hurl, and hurled the protagonist into the sky. Striking a tiger-like pose, Shen Guan then executed Tiger Pounce, lunging midair to smack the protagonist, drawing blood. As the protagonist plummeted back toward the ground, Shen Guan launched another attack, Eagle Dive, soaring toward the protagonist like an eagle. The commentator quipped that Shen Guan resembled a walking zoo. Shen Guan taunted that the protagonist could not defeat him. The protagonist, still midair, shielded himself with firm hands, but Shen Guan landed his Eagle Dive, crashing both of them into the ground. A massive explosion followed, with debris and smoke engulfing the arena. Shen Guan stood up and laughed, claiming the attack was satisfying. The commentator remarked that Shen Guan's relentless assault had left the protagonist with no chance to retaliate. Medical staff were already on standby outside the venue. The Shapewell Fist combination, according to the commentator, was lethal enough to have killed a martial artist in the audience. It appeared that the winner had been decided, Shen Guan of Qingfeng High School. However, just before the announcement, Shen Guan sensed something and grew alert. A colossal silhouette emerged from the smoke, exuding an overwhelming aura. A claw appeared, accompanied by a voice acknowledging Shen Guan's strength. It was revealed to be the protagonist. Now fully transformed following his bloodline awakening, Savage Trace Dimora subverts left side. He resembled a human-shaped Godzilla, radiating immense power. The protagonist remarked that, as a consolation, Shen Guan was the first to witness this form. The commentator noted that any high school student capable of displaying a magical beast embodiment would be eligible to enter Huadu University without taking an entrance exam. Clearly, the commentator was referring to the protagonist. The commentator continued, expressing surprise that such a powerful bloodline genius existed in Ancheng. Alongside the renowned martial arts genius Miss Liu, Shen Guan was shown looking terrified, whispering the words magical beast embodiment. The protagonist, now in his monstrous form, walked toward Shen Guan. Shen Guan expressed disbelief at the overwhelming level of the protagonist's bloodline awakening. The commentator explained that each examiner was equipped with monitoring headphones to track the candidates and environmental conditions. An old man monitoring the situation noticed that the nuclear radiation levels had reached an astronomical value. Shocked, he questioned what was happening. To contain the radiation, the examiners had enveloped the arena with martial energy. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. One person exclaimed that it was the protagonist's bloodline awakening. Another commented on how cool it was and wondered what kind of magical beast he had awakened. A man from number 1 middle school mentioned having heard about the protagonist's unknown bloodline. Another questioned how such a powerful monster could remain unidentified. Hearing these murmurs, the protagonist concluded that there must not be any creature like Dimora on this planet, hence the crowd's unfamiliarity. Meanwhile, Shen Guan, still bleeding and terrified, noted that his nose had started bleeding again. He acknowledged that his martial arts shield was no longer sufficient to block the protagonist's energy. Realizing he couldn't afford to boast anymore, Shen Guan activated his own bloodline awakening, Golden Star Ape Demon. A massive ape demon silhouette appeared behind him, surrounded by a yellow aura. The commentator identified it as another Third-Order King bloodline and commented on the incredible talent pool in this year's examination. Shen Guan, now fully transformed, launched an attack using Formwell Fist, Snake Strike, charging at the protagonist. The protagonist retaliated with his martial art Mountain Arresting Fist, releasing a blue energy blast from his hand. Their fists collided and Shen Guan's arm bled heavily. Looking at his injury, he admitted that had he not released the force in time, his entire arm would have been destroyed. Reflecting on his earlier arrogance, he realized he had underestimated his opponent. Meanwhile, the protagonist continued walking toward Shen Guan, shrouded in black, blue, and purple aura with lightning crackling around him. He acknowledged Shen Guan's skill but declared that it wouldn't change the outcome. The commentator continued in the second match of the top 8 to top 4 of this year's college entrance examination. A third-round king bloodline had appeared, and on the other side there was an unknown powerful bloodline of a magical beast, something so rare that the commentator emphasized it while speaking. He referred to Shen Guan when mentioning the third-order king bloodline and spoke about the protagonist when referring to the unknown powerful bloodline. Both the protagonist and Shen Guan were seen standing and facing each other menacingly. Shen Guan looked at the protagonist and thought that ever since the protagonist's bloodline had awakened, his strength had become simply unfathomable. He admitted to himself that he could no longer suppress the protagonist's martial energy. He realized that the only option left for him was to retreat in order to advance. But just at that moment, the protagonist lunged toward Shen Guan, telling him not to be distracted. The protagonist then began punching Shen Guan furiously. He was punching so fast that it looked like multiple hands were striking Shen Guan simultaneously. However, Shen Guan used his form will fist. His hand moved like a snake toward the protagonist, grabbing his hand. While holding the protagonist's hand, Shen Guan moved backward, stating that although he couldn't budge the protagonist as expected, his aim was to reposition behind him. At that moment, Shen Guan jumped upward and used his martial skill. He used his body to land upon the protagonist. An elephant leg silhouette appeared around Shen Guan as the protagonist looked up, observing the attack. Shen Guan's attack crushed the protagonist, resembling an elephant crushing an ant. After the attack, Shen Guan moved 2 steps backward. What he saw next was unbelievable. The protagonist stood there, arms folded, looking at Shen Guan menacingly. He had taken the full attack while burying his legs into the ground. He started walking toward Shen Guan, saying that it was now his turn. As he charged blue energy into his fist, his menacing form rushed toward Shen Guan for an attack. But right at that moment, Shen Guan suddenly knelt with a thud. The protagonist was shocked. Shen Guan, bowing his head to the ground respectfully, addressed the protagonist, calling him big brother and surrendering. The protagonist, irritated, exclaimed that he was ready for his turn, but now Shen Guan was surrendering. He admitted that he had been riled up, but now he felt uncomfortable. He recalled the attack where Shen Guan had crushed him. But now when it was his turn, Shen Guan had surrendered. He sighed and said, "Forget it." Then the protagonist opened his mouth and emitted a blue fire like Godzilla, stating that holding back energy made him uncomfortable. He returned to his human form. Placing a hand on his head, he acknowledged that according to the rules, once one party surrendered, the other party had no right to attack. At that moment, the commentator declared that the competition was over. He announced that the protagonist from Ancient City's #1 middle school had won. The crowd erupted in cheers for the protagonist, praising his performance. Comments in the live stream mentioned that before the match, Shen Guan had been confident about winning. But after the match, he seemed to admit he hadn't allowed the protagonist to use his full strength. Apologies followed, and people began trolling Shen Guan. The protagonist gained fame on the TikTok app. Some users invited others to join the protagonist's fan group via the WeChat app, noting that the first 3 groups were already full. Others asked people to follow them for updates on the protagonist and shared the full video of the college entrance examination. One said the top scorer in this year's examination was none other than the protagonist. Another added that even Chu Zhu or Liu Qingzhu couldn't match him. Meanwhile, the principal of Qingfeng Private High School, a fat, ugly, aged man, expressed his frustration. While greeting his subordinates, he exclaimed that Luo's I may have lost, but he had placed all his hopes on Shen Guan. He berated Shen Guan for daring to admit defeat. He angrily questioned whether Shen Guan knew how much money had been spent on his training and threatened that if Shen Guan didn't repay the debt, he shouldn't even think about going to college. He pointed at Shen Guan furiously. Shen Guan walked up to the principal and placed a hand on his shoulder. His hand was so large it could cover the principal's entire head. With a glaring expression, Shen Guan asked what the principal was trying to do. He explained that he had admitted defeat because he couldn't take that punch and wanted to avoid bodily harm. He asked if the principal would have taken the punch in his place. Regarding the kindness the school had shown him, Shen Guan promised to repay it slowly in the future. However, he made it clear that the principal could not threaten a warrior stronger than himself. After hearing this, the principal became so frightened that he lost control and agreed nervously, admitting Shen Guan had a point. The scene shifted to a big screen displaying the protagonist and the other 3 contestants who had made it to the top 4. The commentator announced that after fierce competition, the top 4 of this year's college entrance examination had been decided. He referred to the leadership of Anchang City #1 middle school. The principal of that school, the protagonist's school, felt flattered, and the class teacher, Old Yu, praised the protagonist's performance. The commentator then announced the start of the draw ceremony for the semifinals. The protagonist approached the bowl and picked up a ball. It revealed that he had drawn first again. Miss Liu also picked a ball from the bowl and announced that she had drawn first as well. The commentator declared that they would now face each other. He explained that the first game of the college entrance examination semifinals would be an internal battle for Anchang City's #1 middle school since both participants were from the same school. Live stream comments followed. One person expressed excitement, saying they had been waiting to see them fight for a long time. Another called it the strongest battle in the history of Anchang City's college entrance examination. Supporters cheered for Goddess Liu. Others said it was the most anticipated showdown since the start of the exam. Some cheered for the protagonist, insisting that he must win. One comment suggested that Goddess Liu had a better chance of winning. It was revealed that she had mastered 2 mysterious royal martial arts. Another comment mentioned that she had crushed CIA Shaolin, who possessed a 3rd-level king bloodline, and that her 4th-level Netherbird bloodline had yet to be revealed. Someone pointed out that Shen Guan also had a 3rd-order king bloodline and that it was he who had forced the protagonist to awaken his own bloodline. Although the protagonist's bloodline appeared to be very high, possibly 4th level, it was believed that he couldn't compare with Goddess Liu, who not only had a 4th-level bloodline but also a superb martial arts background. Many agreed with this assessment. The scene shifted to the semifinal venue. The crowd was excited. The referee stood facing the 2 opponents. The protagonist and Miss Liu faced each other. The referee introduced Miss Liu from Ancheng City's No. 1 middle school. He then introduced the protagonist, also from Ancheng City's No. 1 middle school, and declared the match had begun. At that very moment, a powerful gush of smoke erupted from the protagonist. Miss Liu covered her face because of the smoke. Within the smoke, the silhouette of an entity behind the protagonist appeared, tearing toward Miss Liu. After seeing that, Miss Liu said she hoped the protagonist was strong enough. The commentator explained that the match was between their protagonist and Liu. As soon as the match began, the protagonist suddenly released a large amount of steam, covering the entire arena. The crowd started murmuring, someone questioned what was going on, and another exclaimed that they couldn't see what was happening. The commentator, visibly excited, shouted how Liu, the talented girl from the Liu family, would deal with the protagonist, who was the dark horse of this year's college entrance examination. They urged everyone to wait and see, wondering aloud if the protagonist had awakened his bloodline again. After releasing the steam, the protagonist watched Liu's silhouette, contemplating that Liu's martial arts skills were far superior to his. With her magical martial arts skills, he thought that no matter how strong his power was, he couldn't hurt her. He acknowledged to himself that such a martial arts genius had a very high combat IQ and that the longer the battle lasted, the more disadvantageous it would become for him. Determined to go all out from the start, the protagonist charged toward Liu with a menacing expression. He used his mountain-arresting fist, and his fist began to glow with blue energy. At that moment, Liu countered with an attack. A swirl of energy surrounded her hands. Liu thought to herself that since the protagonist was taking the initiative to attack, she would use her martial arts to defend and counterattack. But it became clear that the protagonist's previous attack had been a bluff. Suddenly, he kicked Liu. A silhouette of the protagonist's Godzilla-like tail appeared, and the attack struck Liu. Liu thought in disbelief that he had actually tricked her. She performed a backflip and landed gracefully, thinking that the protagonist had shouted about using his fist but ended up using his steel whip attack instead. The monstrous silhouette of Godzilla lingered in the protagonist as he lunged toward Liu. The comments in the livestream exploded. One exclaimed that the protagonist was cheating, declaring he had no moral ethics. Another sympathized with poor Goddess Liu, while another stated that a warrior fights and the war never lies. The protagonist launched a punch toward Liu, which she defended. He continued launching punch after punch, with Liu managing to keep up her defense. Eventually, the protagonist landed a powerful punch to Liu's gut. The livestream comments expressed concern for Goddess Liu, saying her rhythm had been disrupted by this trick and that the protagonist's pursuit was too fierce. They noted that Liu had no chance of escaping at all. At that moment, the protagonist delivered a fierce attack that sent Liu flying. The livestream comments continued, noting that Liu had used her martial energy to shake off the protagonist. Now she could escape his grasp. It was revealed that the previous attack had actually been made by Liu to escape the protagonist's grasp, but the protagonist, with a menacing expression and his hand turning into claws, declared that she wouldn't get away so easily and attacked again. This time, his claws were filled with martial energy. Liu saw the attack and jumped gracefully to dodge it. The attack was so powerful that it blasted far off. Right at that moment, the protagonist closed the distance between himself and Liu. With an evil expression and both fists glowing, he told her not to run away. Liu twitched as a barrage of punches was directed at her by the protagonist. She defended the punches while thinking that he wasn't tired from all these high-intensity attacks and marveled at his physical strength. She reminisced about mastering 2 mysterious royal martial arts, one being the defensive Liu family secret art Floating Shadow, and the other being the more offensive Hunyuan Jade Finger. She knew that if she could use either of these techniques, she would be able to escape from the protagonist's onslaught. But he wasn't giving her any chance to do so. She realized that she wouldn't be able to hold on much longer before falling off the stage. Liu found herself on the brink of the stage while the protagonist continued barraging her with punches. In that moment, she thought to herself that she had no choice left. She had to use that. A purple feather surrounded by purple energy appeared in Liu's hands, catching the protagonist's attention. Liu's expression turned serious, and her eyes brimmed with purple energy as she looked at the protagonist menacingly. She thought that her final trump card was the only option left. She activated her bloodline awakening Netherbird. 2 purple feathers appeared, and suddenly Liu had wings. She hurled herself into the sky, looking down at the protagonist with a stunning glare. Her beautiful purple wings spread wide as she flew gracefully through the air. The commentator announced that Liu had displayed her magical beast bloodline Netherbird for the first time. With a menacing glare, Liu warned the protagonist to be careful, stating that she couldn't control her strength in this form. The protagonist, now excited, grinned and said it was good she had mentioned that because up until now he had only used 50% of his strength. He added that he could now go all out. At that moment, feathers appeared behind the protagonist. He noticed them, and suddenly Liu appeared behind him, using her mysterious royal martial art Hunyuan Jade Finger. But at that instant, the protagonist laughed maniacally and used his atomic blast fist, charging his fist with blue energy. The two attacks collided. Debris flew across the arena due to the impact. The attack was so powerful that a gust of wind swept through the crowd, causing people to cover themselves and exclaim about the strength of the impact. Many said they couldn't even open their eyes. Because of the attack, Liu also covered herself. When she opened her eyes, she was surprised by what she saw. Standing in front of her was the protagonist, exuding a menacing aura. It looked as if he would kill her, his face now covered in scales. The protagonist stared at Liu with a deadly glare. The first semifinal of the college entrance examination began with a face-off between the protagonist and Miss Liu. Miss Liu sensed an ominous energy fluctuation and was visibly unsettled. The commentator questioned aloud what was happening as the true form of the protagonist's magical beast started to materialize. The air buzzed with tension as power began to surge. The protagonist appeared cloaked in Godzilla-like scales, with energy crackling wildly around him. The commentator continued narrating the scene. He observed the protruding spines on the protagonist's back. Radiating immense power, Godzilla-like spines were emerging along his back, and the commentator noted the energy building up within them. He explained that this massive energy was being funneled into the protagonist's mouth slowly but steadily. The protagonist opened his mouth, revealing the energy accumulating within, ready to be unleashed. He then released his atomic breath beam, firing it directly from his mouth. The devastating beam surged toward Miss Liu, who, recognizing the danger, immediately folded her wings to shield herself. She tapped into her latent ability, Awakening. The atomic breath beam collided with Miss Liu, but she activated her feather deflection ability just in time. The commentator exclaimed that the protagonist's breath attack had been successfully deflected by Miss Liu's feathers. The redirected atomic breath beam sped toward the crowd, causing panic as people feared for their safety. Just then, the protective shield positioned in front of the crowd activated. All attacks struck the barrier, and it was revealed to be a skill employed by Mayor Kim of Anchang City. Mayor Kim was using his ability to shield the audience. He declared that they should watch closely, as the strongest champion in Anchang City's history was about to emerge. The scene shifted to the commentator expressing relief that Mayor Kim had protected the audience. Attention turned to Miss Liu, who was now bleeding. Blood dripped from her injuries and her wings were visibly charred. Smoke surrounded her, the result of the protagonist's powerful attack. Despite her injuries, Miss Liu, with one eye open, weakly stated that he had managed to destroy her nether bird defense with a single strike. She faltered, questioning aloud whether she could still win. Memories of her childhood flooded her mind, where immense pressure was placed upon her. Voices from the past reminded her that she was the hope of the Liu family's revival. They told her she could not afford to lose and that the ancestors of the Liu family had their eyes on her. She was told not to disappoint them. As a child, she absorbed this pressure silently. A silhouette of a graceful white-haired woman appeared, speaking to young Miss Liu while placing a hand on her shoulder. The woman, seemingly holding Miss Liu in her grasp, explained that Miss Liu's mother had poured everything into training her for the Liu family's revival. She was told not to act on whims. It became evident that the white-haired lady was none other than Miss Liu's mother. The memory lingered as young Miss Liu called out to her. Back in the present, Miss Liu trembled as she envisioned her mother's silhouette. The memory urged her not only to win the current exam but to continue winning in the future. But Miss Liu, sweating and shaking, whispered that she could hardly breathe. The silhouette faded and Miss Liu felt drained. Looking at the protagonist, she admitted to herself how powerful he was. She reflected that against such strength, losing felt inevitable. However, in that very moment, she lunged at the protagonist. She thought that perhaps he could take advantage of the flaw she was revealing. She mentally addressed him as her classmate, offering him this chance. Miss Liu continued thinking that he should finish her off quickly. She struck the protagonist in the chest with her glowing purple hand. Yet she was stunned when the protagonist didn't dodge. He asked her where her fighting spirit had gone as she twitched. The protagonist questioned if she had even looked him in the eyes. Charging his fist with martial energy, he declared that he intended to win the title fairly and squarely. Miss Liu stared at him in awe as he delivered a powerful punch. She raised her hands to defend against the blow. With a determined expression, the protagonist told Miss Liu that she needed to start facing him seriously. He then unleashed a barrage of punches, repeatedly asking if she was taking him seriously. Miss Liu, shielding herself, cried out that he was a bad person. No one had dared hit her like that since childhood. She confessed that she had planned to surrender the match to him. She wondered aloud why he kept pressing the fight. At that moment, dark red energy surged from her as she shouted at the protagonist not to hit a girl in the face. The protagonist responded that that was more like it. He warned her that if she didn't want to be hit, she should fight seriously. Suddenly, Miss Liu activated the taboo martial art Bloodline Ignition. She transformed into an otherworldly being. Large, elegant wings unfurled behind her as she revealed her magical beast's true form. Her eyes glowed like those of a fierce bird as she looked straight at the protagonist. She told him that, as he wished, she would defeat him using her strongest form. The audience saw the protagonist gazing at the true form of Miss Liu. With a menacing smile, he remarked that she had finally revealed the true form of her magical beast. He stated that things were finally getting interesting and admitted that he could no longer afford to be negligent. The viewers then witnessed the protagonist transform into his Godzilla form, shimmering with energy and cloaked in blue fire. He activated his hard Qi Gong, and a silhouette of Godzilla appeared behind him. It was explained that this was the protagonist's physical skill, which combined the Dimora template with hard Qi Gong and was called Nuclear Light Combat Body. The protagonist lunged toward Miss Liu in this form, declaring that they should have a good fight. Miss Liu said nothing in response but stared at the protagonist with a menacing look. At that moment, she activated her Tearing Hurricane, launching a purple hurricane attack towards the protagonist. The protagonist was sucked into the hurricane. However, he blasted through it using his explosive fist attack. Miss Liu did not relent. She gathered energy around her mouth and released a loud scream, sending a powerful sound wave toward the protagonist. The sound wave attack collided with the protagonist's fist, but her power overwhelmed him. He shielded himself with his hand and with a threatening gaze asked if she thought she was the only one who could scream. Energy was seen gathering along the protagonist's spine. At the same time, Miss Liu placed 2 fingers on her forehead, gathering energy. She muttered that it was the same old trick again and declared that she wouldn't back down this time. She gave up on defense to unleash her family's strongest move as a shimmering blue light surrounded her. The light originated from the 2 fingers placed on her forehead, appearing truly magnificent. She continued, stating that she would face him head-on. Moments earlier, the protagonist had begun charging energy into his spine, and now that energy was released from his mouth in the form of an atomic breath beam directed at Miss Liu. At the same moment, Miss Liu declared her bloodline ability, Netherworld Blood Thorns. Multiple purple energy arrows were launched toward the protagonist. The atomic breath beam and the Netherworld Blood Thorns attack were on the verge of collision. Everyone in the audience stood up as the commentator announced that the protagonist's atomic breath and Miss Liu's Netherworld Blood Thorns had formed 2 immensely powerful impacts. The commentator warned that the collision of such power was beyond the control of either warrior. The mayor was then seen beginning to use his gene technique, orange light gathering in his hands. He performed a specific hand gesture, summoning multiple pillars and activating the divine leyline wall as massive structures emerged. The 2 attacks collided with vicious force. Debris flew everywhere, breaking the protective walls erected by the mayor. The crowd murmured in awe at the strength of the impact. They questioned whether the wall was created by the mayor and whether he had contained the effects of the collision. The arena was shrouded in smoke, and the wall created to protect the audience was shown to be shattering. The murmurs continued, with people acknowledging that had the mayor not intervened, they might have all been collateral damage. The mayor internally noted that his 3 leyline walls had been prepared too hastily. He reflected that they were not as solid as usual and concluded that the attacks of the protagonist and Miss Liu had ultimately collided. He pondered the improbability of encountering 2 such incredibly strong candidates in this year's college entrance examination. At that moment, the scene transitioned, revealing a bloody hand belonging to none other than Miss Liu. Her left hand appeared severely bruised. The hand had turned purple and blood dripped from it. While kneeling, she stated that the power of the magical beast's true body had been exhausted. Sadness filled her eyes as she declared she could not give up and insisted that she could still fight. Just then, the protagonist stepped forward and stood in front of Miss Liu. Through the smoke, Miss Liu looked up at him. The protagonist stared back at her. Miss Liu thought to herself that her attacks had clearly landed, yet he was unharmed. The protagonist told her that if she didn't rid her body of nuclear radiation, she would be crippled in the future. Miss Liu clenched her lips, biting them with tears forming in her eyes. She confessed that she hadn't wanted the fight to escalate to such an extent. She questioned why the protagonist insisted on forcing her to fight. As the protagonist knelt beside her, the protagonist then looked at Miss Liu and posed a question with quiet intensity. He asked whether she truly didn't want to fight him or if she was merely being rebellious and unwilling to admit her competitive spirit. He remarked that when she was fighting hard just moments ago, he could feel her desire for victory. His words cut through the emotional haze, laying bare the truth behind her earlier actions. Miss Liu recalled that he had been right. She remembered that she had been intent on defeating him and had thus abandoned her defense to use all her strength. She wondered what was wrong with her. Acknowledging that although she hated fighting and had initially wanted to lose quickly, during the battle she had felt something different. She had experienced the exhilaration of fighting, not for anyone else but for herself. At that moment, the protagonist placed his hand on Miss Liu's shoulder, causing her to blush. He told her that she had too many distracting thoughts while fighting. As he activated one of his abilities, Miss Liu noticed his hand glowing blue. He turned away, stating that this was the reason she had lost. Miss Liu looked at her arm and body, thinking that the radiation and her injuries had been healed. Without turning back, the protagonist stated that she was still the strongest opponent he had ever faced. Then he looked back with a slight smile and expressed that if given the chance, he wished to have the purest battle with her, Liu Qingzhu. Upon hearing this, Miss Liu blushed once again. At that moment, the commentator announced that the smoke from the impact had dissipated, revealing the protagonist. He was still standing. The protagonist raised his hand and pointed towards the sky. The commentator then declared that the first match of the semifinal was over. The protagonist from Ancheng City, number 1 Middle High School, had won. The scene shifted, and the commentator announced that after the protagonist defeated Miss Liu, Chuzhou also won his semifinal match as expected. Now, the biggest climax of Ancheng City College's entrance examination was about to begin. The battle for the top scorer commenced, and Chuzhou's face appeared on the big screen in the arena as the commentator continued. It was a showdown between two students from Ancheng City 1 Middle High School. The commentator described the protagonist as a dark horse, while Chuzhou was called an apex. The number of viewers on the live stream for this final match kept increasing. The commentator declared that the Ancheng City College entrance examination finals had begun. Chuzhou was seen holding a sword made of ice and pointed it toward the protagonist. The protagonist, wearing a menacing smile, evenly invited him to come at him with everything he had. At that moment, Chuzhou unleashed a beautiful technique. Multiple clones of him appeared, all rushing toward the protagonist. The clones moved so smoothly it seemed like a dance in the arena. Chuzhou was using his 7-star steps technique and coordinated his clones perfectly. The protagonist stood calmly, ready to receive the attack. Suddenly, the protagonist shouted the name of his attack, Atomic. Blue martial energy gathered in his hand as he launched the atomic explosive fist, striking the ground. All of Chuzhou's clones that were approaching him with ice swords were destroyed by the impact. Chuzhou shielded himself against the powerful gust that followed the protagonist's attack. He remarked that the protagonist was too lazy to search for the real body among the clones, so he used a simple and crude move to eliminate all of them. In the aftermath of the atomic explosive fist, smoke filled the air. Chuzhou admitted to himself that even with his defensive abilities, he couldn't fight the protagonist head-on. He questioned whether there existed any warrior of the same age who could take the protagonist in hand-to-hand combat, calling him a monster. But resolve still burned in Chuzhou's eyes. He declared that if he couldn't win in close combat, he would exhaust the protagonist from a distance. He immediately began preparing a new attack. Chuzhou activated his bloodline awakening, revealing the ice elemental dragon. A monstrous silhouette formed behind him as small, thin horns grew from his head like a dragon. The dragon silhouette represented the ice elemental dragon. He then activated his bloodline ability, Icy Pulse. A barrage of ice formed, potentially trapping the protagonist within. Live stream comments erupted in amazement. Someone exclaimed that Chuzhou had created an iceberg out of thin air. Another comment likened him to the reincarnation of an ice dragon. Fans complimented Chuzhou's looks, and someone even encouraged him to defeat the great devil, the protagonist. The commentator confirmed that Chuzhou's icy pulse was powerful enough to form an iceberg on the battlefield. The protagonist had been frozen inside the iceberg. Chuzhou reflected on the toll such a sudden and strong burst of icy force had on his body. The commentator added that the iceberg had begun melting. As the iceberg melted, the protagonist was revealed within. Suddenly, the protagonist burst out of the iceberg. Chuzhou was shocked, wondering how that was even possible. He was stunned that the protagonist had broken out so easily. The protagonist charged toward Chuzhou. In defense, Chuzhou erected an ice wall in front of him. The protagonist collided with the wall. Emerging from the impact, the protagonist declared that Chuzhou's ice dragon power had never worked on him. Now in his Godzilla form, the protagonist remarked that he seemed to counter Chuzhou quite a bit. Chuzhou sighed, acknowledging the vast gap in their strength. Yet with unwavering determination, Chuzhou announced his final move. He said this move represented the current limit of his martial arts, originally intended for Miss Liu. At that moment, he activated the move. A massive sword-like structure of ice formed in his hand. He unleashed his soul-damaging sword intent. The mayor, upon witnessing this, was shocked that someone so young could already possess such strength. With sword intent, Chuzhou charged at the protagonist. But then blood began to drip from the protagonist's hand. A small wound appeared on the protagonist's transformed hand. He acknowledged the strike. He told Chuzhou that perhaps with a better sword in the future he might have a chance. Realizing that the sword had merely scratched the protagonist, Chuzhou was shocked. He noticed that his sword had been destroyed. Chuzhou looked at the protagonist and asked how much of a chance he truly had. The protagonist smiled and responded that it was perhaps a little greater than becoming a successful simp. At that moment, Chuzhou raised his hand and surrendered. Amid the smoke, the commentator announced that the winner of the Ancheng City College entrance examination finals was the protagonist. Viewers of the live stream were ecstatic. One man, overjoyed, declared that he had been right about the protagonist. He said the protagonist was awesome, and although Chuzhou was strong, he couldn't match the protagonist. The protagonist struck a pose, and comments flooded the stream, calling him the ultimate dark horse. His live stream played across billboards on multiple buildings. One comment stated that the protagonist had been at the bottom of the class last year but had now defeated the top student and become the top scorer. Another comment admired the elevated standard of this year's college entrance examination. Praises continued to pour in for the protagonist. The scene shifted to the crowd in the arena. Everyone was chanting the protagonist's name. The commentator pointed toward the protagonist and addressed the audience who had followed the 24th college entrance examination of Ancheng City, both on-site and via live broadcast. After 3 days of intense battles, the top scorer of Ancheng City's college entrance examination had finally been crowned. The protagonist simply smiled, feeling proud that he had achieved his goal. The commentator announced his name as the top scorer from Anchang City No. 1 Middle School. The commentator then shoved a microphone toward the protagonist, asking if he had anything to say now that he had reached the top, especially since his strength came from consistent effort and growth over time. The protagonist, surprised by the sudden interview, thought to himself that the commentator was truly cultured for being able to describe his cheating so eloquently. He smiled, cleared his throat, and began his speech by thanking his teacher. He said it was his teacher who never gave up on him and encouraged him during his lowest moments, which gave him his fighting spirit. At that moment, the scene shifted to his class teacher, who was seen hugging his TV and saying he didn't deserve such praise. The teacher felt guilty for not having recognized the protagonist's potential earlier. Back in the arena, the headmaster of the protagonist's school called out to him. The protagonist noticed him. The headmaster gestured with a sign indicating a 2 million yuan scholarship and said it was to promote Anchang City No. 1 Middle School. He offered the 2 million scholarship as a reward. Upon hearing this, the protagonist's eyes sparkled with greed and he thanked the headmaster. He added that without the headmaster's wise leadership, he wouldn't be where he was. Essentially, the principal was using this moment to advertise his school. Then the protagonist clenched his fist and raised his hand, speaking into the microphone. He stated that finally he wanted to thank himself. Without his personal hard work and intelligence, he wouldn't have achieved such success. At that moment, a system notification panel appeared, announcing congratulations to the host for winning the title of No. 1 Scholar, along with a reward of a random template. The protagonist was shocked after reading the message and thought about the title of No. 1 Scholar. He realized that the template also had an achievement system. The scene shifted to the stadium corridor. Many reporters with cameras and phone mics were seen chasing the protagonist, frantically running behind him, exclaiming that he had come out. One of them asked him if he found it difficult to win first place. Another asked whether he was going to Huadu University, yet another inquired how he managed to grow so fast in just half a year. The protagonist, running from all the reporters, told them to stop chasing him as he needed to go to the toilet. A reporter persistently asked him who he thought was prettier, Liu Qingzhu or Kai Xiaoling. The same reporter continued, asking if he preferred Shen Guan or Chu Zhou. Hearing these questions, the protagonist grew annoyed but kept running. He muttered that he didn't have time to waste with the reporters, but they kept chasing him, pleading with him to wait. A cameraman and a reporter insisted they had a final question. At that moment, the scene shifted to a basketball court. The protagonist appeared there, grinning happily and expressing relief that he had finally gotten rid of the reporters. He noted that he was not limited to one template and could obtain more through system rewards. A silhouette of a man's shadow appeared, congratulating the protagonist on winning the top spot. The protagonist, startled, wondered if more reporters had sneaked in. Just then, the man removed his hat. He clarified that he wasn't a reporter but was from Huadu University. With a serious gaze, he brought up the issue of genetic locks. The protagonist, dazed by this topic, recalled that he hadn't opened any genetic law. He reflected that all his abilities came from the monster template and wondered if the man knew about his powers, questioning who he was. The man put his hat back on and asked if the protagonist had heard the term genetic lock from his father. The protagonist confirmed this and recalled from the original body's memory that this was true. The man took something out of his bag and asked if the protagonist was curious how his father, an ordinary taxi driver, knew a term so inconsistent with his profession. Giving the man a side eye, the protagonist speculated if a big secret was involved. The man then took out a document from his bag and informed the protagonist that due to his special situation, he could unlock a secret document. The protagonist accepted and opened the document, visibly shocked by its contents. The document stated that Prometheus, a research institute once a giant in the field of biological genes on Blue Star Planet, had been wanted and blocked by various countries due to an incident. Its core researchers were forced to hide their identities and live among civilians. It was mentioned that genetic lock technology had been a key project of Prometheus. Reading this, the protagonist concluded that they suspected his father, who he considered a cheap dad, to be a senior researcher of Prometheus and that he himself might be a secret research result of Prometheus. He voiced this speculation to the man. The man reassured him that the country wouldn't make things difficult and that he had only come to inform him of the situation, as he had the right to know. Suspiciously, the protagonist commented that if he claimed to be calmer than the man, would he believe it? The man explained that since the protagonist was a key prospect in the country's training program, his safety would always be protected. Smugly, the protagonist's nose metaphorically grew large. He remarked sarcastically about the annoyances of fame and how quickly society adapted. The man then took his leave. The protagonist gave an evil smile and remarked that the man had finally left. He reflected that he had profited greatly from the college entrance examination, gaining not only admission to Huadu University but also a 2 million scholarship from the principal and an additional 800,000 yuan bonus. Most importantly, he could now draw a new template ability from the system. He activated his system and clicked on it, exclaiming that he couldn't wait any longer. A swirl of purple energy appeared in front of him, leaving him dazed. From the purple swirl, a card emerged and activated, summoning a gigantic creature. The system panel indicated that it was a D-rank template. The template was called a super giant humanoid. Bro pulled out the colossal titan from Attack on Titan. Its bloodline ability was gigantification, allowing it to grow to 60 meters and evolve ultra-heated steam. Its evolution path was immutable humanoid compatibility. Current compatibility stood at 1%. The protagonist, recalling the name Supergiant Humanoid, widened his eyes. He pondered whether abilities between templates could be superimposed. He imagined what would happen if the Supergiant Humanoid template was combined with the Demora template. He visualized Godzilla and the Supergiant Humanoid in one frame and believed he would become the true king of monsters. The scene then shifted to a man on the phone with someone. The caller asked if he had personal matters to deal with and was not accepting any more tasks. The man confirmed and instructed to cancel all upcoming schedules. The caller acknowledged. The man sitting on a sofa chair placed his finger on a hole in the table in front of him and smashed it, showing a menacing expression. He had a tattoo on his face and emitted an ominous vibe. At that moment, someone contacted him. The contact, covered in radioactive soap, reported that they hadn't found the body of the man's brother in the secret death realm, but had discovered residue where his signal last appeared. Tests showed small amounts of nuclear radiation. The man had a large screen displaying the protagonist's fight in the entrance examination. He closed his eyes and lamented to his younger brother, saying he had warned him not to get involved in society. He questioned why his brother hadn't listened, recalling their mother's plea for him to take care of his sibling. The screen showed the protagonist winning the college entrance examination. The man walked up to the TV and addressed the protagonist, acknowledging him as a rare genius in Anchang City. He predicted that even Huadu University would be desperate to enroll him. Regretfully, he declared that they wouldn't get the chance. It was revealed that this man was the brother of the bald man the protagonist had killed in the secret realm. The scene shifted to the protagonist's home, where someone announced a delivery. The protagonist accepted and opened the package, wondering who had sent it when he was just about to test the new template in the secret realm. Inside, there was a message from the Huadu Universe Central Research Bureau informing him that a new secret realm crack would open in Anchang City's Redwood Mountain at 3:00 p.m. that day. The estimated rank of the secret realm was C. The message included a request to investigate the new secret realm and an invitation to form a team, signed by Chuzhou. Reading this, the protagonist frowned, questioning why Chuzhou still used letters in this era, even suspecting he might be a time traveler. The scene transitioned to Anchang City's Redwood Mountain. A beautiful red forested mountain bathed in sunlight was shown, with many people gathering to explore the soon-to-open secret realm. The protagonist estimated that at least 1,000 people were present, acknowledging the popularity of a new secret realm. Chuzhou appeared and greeted the protagonist, who responded in kind. Chuzhou remarked that the protagonist had become stronger. Facing Chuzhou, the protagonist thought he hadn't expected Chuzhou to notice the change. He had used the money from the college entrance exam to purchase gene drugs, boosting the Supergiant Humanoid template's compatibility from 1% to 35%. He realized that low-level monster templates had the advantage of producing quick results. The protagonist asked Chuzhou what university he planned to apply to. Chuzhou answered that he was applying to Huadu University. The protagonist responded that it seemed they would still be schoolmates and noticed Chuzhou's mood was slightly off. At that moment, murmurs rose among the crowd, announcing that the secret realm was opening. A purple crack formed in the air. From it emerged a three-headed bird-like monster. It was seen that a three-headed bird-like monster emerged from the crack of the secret realm, and the people stood in awe watching the spectacle. Someone in the crowd shouted that the secret realm had opened. Another voice called out to his brothers to tear the monster apart and kill their way into the secret realm. Upon hearing that battle cry, everyone lunged toward the monster, trying to rip it apart. At that moment, it became evident that the bird monster could talk, and one of its three heads screamed in panic, stating that it was too fierce outside and that there were too many warriors. Another head instructed to retreat quickly. The bird monster was clearly panicked. The third head said it couldn't go back and that it was stuck. But their panic was in vain, as all the warriors ended up slaying the bird monster. The scene then shifted to the Redwood Mountain secret realm. Inside the secret realm, the protagonist and his team members, including Chuzhou, were seen. Chuzhou sniffed the air and remarked on the intense stench of blood. Suddenly, a beast tide appeared, with many monsters running wild and rampant. The protagonist identified it as a beast tide and noted that the beasts had been waiting for them. Right then, all the warriors charged toward the beast tide, declaring that in accordance with national laws, they must prioritize killing monsters and resisting the tide. One warrior was seen chopping a monster's head off, another stabbing his sword into a snake-like creature. Chuzhou awakened and activated his bloodline ability. He slashed his sword, which was made of eyes, toward the monster. The monsters were struck by ice spikes that emerged from the ground after Chuzhou's strike, but one monster managed to escape. That monster appeared behind Chuzhou, but just then an atomic explosive fist attack blasted the monster into pieces, startling Chuzhou. It was none other than the protagonist who had used the atomic explosive fist. Smoke was seen coming from his hand as he warned Chuzhou to watch out behind him. Chuzhou thanked him. The protagonist then remarked that none of the beasts inside the secret realm were worth fighting. Many monsters had already been defeated, and only skeletal remains smoked on the ground. Chuzhou gasped, stating that the protagonist had already slain so many monsters. He continued, observing that the monsters the protagonist killed seemed to have had their flesh and blood melted. He deduced that it must have been due to large-scale nuclear radiation, which was hard to resist, silent, and terrifying because it could attack living cells directly. The protagonist was seen emitting a massive amount of radiation, melting monster flesh as he casually walked through the secret realm, a blue aura surrounding him and a grinning, evil smile on his face. The warriors murmured, wondering why the battle behind them ended so quickly, and questioned whether a high-level warrior was among them. When answered that it was actually Anchang City's top scorer in the college entrance examination. A man, sweating, asked how a martial artist could kill so many monsters. Another man in a hoodie replied by asking if he hadn't watched the live broadcast of the college entrance examination that year. The man answered no, questioning the appeal of high schoolers fighting. The man in the hoodie called him a foolish idiot, saying that one high school student could beat 10 of them. The man was left speechless. Right at that moment, many warriors appeared in front of the protagonist, forming a V formation. The one in the middle commanded them to drive the monsters toward the number one scorer, the protagonist. Just then, a signal flare shot into the sky. Someone announced that a signal had come from the front and that the leader of the Beast Tide was defeated. Another warrior declared victory, stating that the Beast Tide had begun to retreat. The scene then transitioned to Chuzhou wiping sweat off his face and saying they had at least resisted the first wave of beasts. He noted that while there were initially thousands of warriors, only about 800 remained, with many wounded. The protagonist appeared, exhausted, carrying 2 bags full of monster cores. He asked Chuzhou if there was a way to transport all his gains. Chuzhou, shocked, asked how he had obtained so many monster cores. He then handed a ring to the protagonist, explaining that it was his storage ring and that all the material could be placed inside. The protagonist smiled, remarking that a storage ring was worth tens of millions and he didn't realize Chuzhou was so rich. At that moment, murmurs spread among the warriors, saying that boss Wu Sen and his friends were back. They looked at Wu Sen with admiration, saying that without him killing the Lord-level monsters, they would have died from exhaustion in the beast herd. Wu Sen, a muscular man with tattoos and sharp eyes, greeted the protagonist, identifying him as the top scorer in Anchang City's college entrance examination. He introduced himself as the leader of the Silver Wolf Martial Arts Group. Wu Sen approached the protagonist, saying he had just heard about his heroic performance and asked if he was willing to join the group. He assured that joining wouldn't affect the protagonist's college education and that various subsidies and benefits would be provided. Wu Sen even offered to sign an S-level membership contract. The crowd erupted in awe, their eyes shining. They murmured about how Wu Sen had personally invited the protagonist, recognizing the rare opportunity. They acknowledged that a solo warrior couldn't sustain the expensive martial career and noted that the Silver Wolf Martial Arts Group was one of the biggest in Xia Kingdom. Even ordinary Huadu University students weren't eligible for S-level contracts. At that moment, a beautiful purple-haired girl riding a tiger beast enveloped in purple aura appeared. She addressed Wu Sen, teasing that he had rushed ahead to grab people. She then turned to the protagonist, inviting him to join the Chengda Martial Arts Group. Though smaller, she promised 15% of the group's monthly training resources. The crowd gasped in awe again, marveling that a high schooler had 2 major martial arts groups competing to recruit him. However, the protagonist casually picked his ear and declined, stating he had no intention of joining any martial arts group. Wu Sen laughed slightly, acknowledging that recruiting the top scorer wasn't so easy. He proposed that they at least become friends and invited the protagonist to contact the Silver Wolf Group anytime. The purple-haired girl echoed the sentiment, saying the Chengda group would await his call. The protagonist shook Wu Sen's hand and agreed to friendship, but someone nearby pointed out that he had just used that hand to dig earwax. The protagonist simply told them not to worry about such details. Chuzhou then approached and said that since the beast tide was repelled, they could now explore freely. He suggested they first head to the treetops to get an overview of the area and plan accordingly. The protagonist agreed and both were seen flying, though Chuzhou noted that the protagonist's speed was remarkable. They soon reached the treetops and began observing. Chuzhou's eyes widened as he asked what the giant creatures below were. From the treetops, they saw enormous beings. Chuzhou guessed that their bodies were over 1,000 meters high and said it was hard to imagine. Meanwhile, the protagonist looked thrilled and excited. He said it wasn't hard to imagine and that, as young warriors, they might be able to conquer the secret realm's beasts in the coming years and uncover the realm's truths. Chuzhou stared at him, thinking that, as expected, the protagonist showed confidence where others would fear. He realized that the protagonist was superior not only in martial arts but also in willpower. He acknowledged that the protagonist was the true warrior. Just then, the protagonist looked at the monstrous giants and, speaking to himself, set a goal that one day their monster cores would be his. He activated his life magnetic field and noticed something strange. His light magnetic field could detect the uneven distribution of life across the secret realm. But there was an amber area in the southeast that seemed like a vacuum zone, completely empty. He thought to himself that where there was smoke, there was fire, and that greater waves and winds brought more valuable fish. He pointed toward an area, saying it was the Stud Lake. Chuzhou looked southeast and confirmed there was a lake there. The protagonist directed him to head in that direction to investigate. The scene transitioned to the lake in the southeast, where the protagonist had pointed earlier. The protagonist and Chuzhou were already at the lake within its vicinity. It was then that the protagonist noticed Sister Yuli. Yuli stood with her two companions, and she greeted the protagonist, remarking with a playful tone that he was their top scorer. She admitted that she hadn't expected him to be so powerful. One of her companions, a bald man, expressed surprise and asked Yuli if she knew Anchang City's little top scorer. The other companion, a girl wearing spectacles, eagerly requested Yuli to introduce him, stating how impressive he had been during the recent Beast Tide battle. The protagonist walked toward the group and asked Sister Yuli how long they had been there. Yuli replied that they had just arrived, and that two of their teammates who were proficient swimmers had gone down to the lake to explore. Everyone stood along the shore when a man suddenly emerged from the water, panting heavily. Climbing onto the ground with excitement, he shouted that they had hit a jackpot and were going to be rich. Yuli asked him to explain clearly what he meant. The man informed her that there was a relic beneath the lake and that they were going to make a fortune. Delighted, Yuli exclaimed that it was awesome and declared that they were rich. The protagonist elbowed Chuzhou and asked what relics were and why everyone was so excited. Chuzhou explained that within secret realms, there were mysterious buildings believed to have been left behind by a civilization from the secret world. Experts collectively referred to these structures as relics. He added that the theoretical foundation of modern human martial arts and many genetic technologies originated from these relics. Suddenly, the man who had emerged from the lake changed his expression to one of menace. He looked toward the protagonist and Chuzhou and accused them of eavesdropping. Drawing his sword, he demanded to know who they were. Yuli intervened, stopping the man identified as Yu Yang, and explained that the protagonist and Chuzhou were the first and second top scorers in the Anchang City College entrance examination. She emphasized that their strength surpassed that of most ordinary warriors and suggested that they join their group. Feeling smug, the protagonist placed his hand on Chuzhou's shoulder, and the two posed heroically. The protagonist told Yu Yang not to be agitated and offered their assistance in exploring the ruins. Clearly frustrated, Yu Yang questioned how the spoils would be divided. The protagonist responded casually, saying that they were just external aids and that the distribution could be based on their contributions. The more they helped, the more they would receive. Though displeased, Yu Yang agreed reluctantly, warning them not to get any ideas. Internally, however, he acknowledged that these two were likely to become significant figures in the future and thought it best not to antagonize them. The entire party then proceeded to swim beneath the lake and ventured into a majestic underwater cave. Upon reaching the cave, someone in the group questioned whether they had found the ruins. Yu Yang appeared puzzled, wondering where a certain individual had gone, noting that he had asked him to remain nearby. The bald companions speculated that perhaps the person had found some treasure and left. Yu Yang attempted to contact him via radio but received no reply. The party then questioned Yu Yang about whether he had checked for any signs of monster activity in the cave. Yu Yang admitted that he hadn't and explained that both he and Li Wei had deployed all the monster bait bombs, yet no monsters had appeared. The girl with spectacles warned that the place seemed dangerous and questioned whether they should proceed, especially since Li Wei had disappeared. Frustrated, Yu Yang insisted that they continue, arguing that those afraid to seize wealth and glory would remain low-level warriors forever. He declared that anyone who feared death should leave now, but those who wanted riches should stay. The group, though clearly startled, made no move to withdraw. Seeing this, Yu Yang led them further into the cave, his torch casting a purple glow. As they moved forward, they began noticing footprints. The protagonist sensed that something was wrong and silently mouthed his concerns to Chuzhou. Chuzhou responded similarly, noting that the timeline didn't add up. According to Yuli, their team had arrived at the lake only about 10 minutes ago. Yet Yu Yang and Li Wei had already discovered the cave, navigated its complex layout, and located the ruins. It was as if they had used some kind of cheat, like activating a map perspective in a game. Chuzhou suggested that this was clearly a setup and asked whether they should alert the others and leave. The protagonist, with an ominous smile, told him not to panic, claiming he had a trump card. Their entire exchange occurred through lip movements. The group ventured deeper into the cave, where sharp, green vine-wrapped stones hung from the ceiling. Among the vines were monster cores that had lost their brilliance, seemingly drained long ago. The area was littered with monster skeletons. Yu Yang commented that it now made sense why he hadn't seen many aquatic beasts while diving. They had likely been devoured by the vines. Yuli asked Yu Yang where the ruins were. At that moment, the girl with spectacles pointed at the ceiling in horror. There hung a corpse drained of flesh and life, wrapped in green vines. It was Li Wei. She screamed that Li Wei was dead. Everyone was horrified. Yuli was too stunned to speak. Yu Yang dropped to his knees, clutching his head and chanting frantically, questioning the ruins' location and Li Wei's death. He cried out about vines and suddenly shouted that they had caught him too and warned everyone to run. Just then, his head began to swell as if something green were trying to break out. His veins popped and his head burst, releasing a mass of green vines and blood. Yuli called out to Yu Yang in shock, while the girl with spectacles collapsed, speculating whether he had also been taken over. A shimmering light suddenly blasted toward Yu Yang, killing the vines. It was the protagonist's atomic breath that had delivered the attack. He commented in disbelief about how cunning the monster was. He deduced that after killing Li Wei, the monster had parasitized one of them to lure in more prey. It became clear that they had all walked into its hunting ground. A large plant-like creature made of green vines loomed on the cave's ceiling, watching them. It pushed massive rocks to block the exit, trapping the group. The party panicked, realizing that the creature had blocked their escape. Chuzhou identified the monster as a second-level king-class monster known as the Ghost Demon Vine. Yuli was terrified, noting that this level couldn't be measured by ordinary standards and that they were not strong enough to fight it. The protagonist, undeterred, declared that he didn't care what level it was and vowed to crush the ugly beast. Just then, the blocked path was blasted open. The one responsible was none other than Huo Peng's brother, who walked in surrounded by crimson fire. He announced that he had come to kill the protagonist. The party murmured upon seeing the crimson energy, identifying it as qi and blood smoke and concluding that the man was an 8th-level warrior. The brother of Huo Peng was seen glaring menacingly at the protagonist, who stood tall without flinching. The protagonist looked back at Huo Peng and asked if someone was still pinning for him. In response, Huo Peng's brother began to speak. He revealed that he had heard of someone using nuclear radiation in the secret realm of Redwood Mountain to resist the beast tide, and from that he deduced the protagonist's location. He explained to the protagonist that he had tracked him by following the residual radiation traces in order to prevent being found himself. He had followed the protagonist all the way to the underground cave, carefully hiding his own presence. However, he admitted that despite his precautions, the protagonist had still managed to find him and block the passage with a massive rock to hinder his progress. Huo Peng's brother further narrated how he had stopped his heartbeat, breathing, and other vital signs, entering a state of suspended animation. Yet the protagonist had still been able to detect him. He acknowledged that the protagonist was someone capable of forcing his entire Huo family into a desperate situation. The protagonist, unfazed by the long speech, looked at the man before him and asked who he was. He questioned why the man had barged in and started monologuing gibberish, and whether they even knew each other. At that moment, Huo Peng's brother grew enraged and lunged toward the protagonist with his fist, yelling for him to stop pretending and go to hell. Unbeknownst to him, plant-like monster vines were creeping up behind. These vines latched onto him, and while being captured, he realized that it was the lair of a ghost demon vine. He accused the protagonist of luring him there to let the monster deal with him and laughed maniacally, cursing the setup as part of the protagonist's plan. He began fighting the vines, noting aloud that the demon ghost vine absorbed material energy and released neurotoxins. He confessed that if he continued the fight, he would surely fall there and accused the protagonist of tricking him. Delivering punches and kicks to the vines, he tried to resist their hold. The protagonist observed him calmly and remarked that bro must have watched too many K-dramas, insisting it was their first meeting and that he was merely imagining things. Then Huo Peng's brother stomped the ground, releasing a flare of crimson energy, and shouted that his target was the protagonist, not the vines. The stomping caused the rocks on the cave ceiling to start collapsing. Yuli, shocked, cried out that the cave was going to collapse due to the fight. The protagonist from behind called out to Yuli, urging her to get out of the way. She turned around to see him charging energy in his mouth, preparing to unleash an atomic breath beam attack. The energy gathered and he fired it into the walls of the cave, causing water from the lake to begin flooding in. He gestured to Yuli, telling her and the others to leave first as the cave filled with water. Just then, Huo Peng's brother, with his fiery crimson fist, attempted to attack the protagonist, warning him not to think about escaping. However, Chuzhou intercepted the attack, using his soul-damaging sword intent and unleashing a barrage of ice spikes that created a barrier between the brother and the protagonist. He declared that as long as he was there, not even a strand of the protagonist's hair would be harmed. Huo Peng's brother scoffed and declared himself an 8th-level warrior, mocking the ice spikes as mere hail. At that moment, the protagonist charged at him with a fist, shouting to the chatterbox uncle where he was looking. He landed a powerful punch on Huo Peng's brother's face using his atomic explosive fist, crushing him into the ground. After the blow, the protagonist turned to Chuzhou and advised him to leave, pointing out that the enemy was a high-level warrior and too difficult for Chuzhou to handle in his current state. Chuzhou acknowledged the instruction, but Huo Peng's brother was not defeated yet. He stood up, enveloped in smoke. Meanwhile, on the shore of the lake, a party member commented that the ghost demon vine had gone berserk and was stirring up chaos beneath the lake. Chuzhou emerged on shore, and Yuli immediately asked him where the protagonist was. Chuzhou didn't respond and instead looked back at the lake. At that moment, blue energy crackled across the lake, followed by a massive explosion. The protagonist had summoned his supergiant humanoid. It was revealed that he had pummeled Huo Peng's brother so severely that the latter's body had turned purple. Chuzhou witnessed the spectacle while Yuli shielded herself from the breeze. In the midst of the smoke and radiation, blue lightning continued to crackle, and within it, the outline of the protagonist's supergiant humanoid form could be seen. The protagonist emerged from the lake, and Chuzhou, running toward him, called out. The protagonist asked Chuzhou to lend him some clothes as he was naked. Now sitting on the shore, the protagonist listened as Chuzhou inquired about the recent explosion. The protagonist explained that the mysterious warrior had brought a plasma bomb and died together with the ghost demon vine. Chuzhou, scratching his head, questioned if it was really a plasma bomb and noted that it seemed more powerful, even mentioning that he saw a giant in the smoke. Trying to hide the truth, the protagonist denied it, claiming it was simply the explosion and that Chuzhou had seen it wrongly. Internally, the protagonist thought to himself that it was a good thing they could be deceived. He feared the consequences if they discovered his monster template ability. He admitted to himself that he had been heavy-handed, crushing the warrior into ash, losing the corpse ghost demon vine but at least obtaining the magic core of the ghost demon vine. Later, Yuli's party prepared to leave. She turned to the protagonist and expressed her regret that he had followed them for nothing and ended up saving them. She promised compensation once they left the secret realm. The protagonist, waving goodbye, told her not to be so polite. He considered it repayment for a favor she had done for him in the past and stated that if she compensated him, he would be indebted again. Then, approaching Chuzhou, the protagonist declared it was time to start killing monsters and enjoy themselves, both of them grinning. The scene shifted to 3 days later at the Redwood Mountains secret realm entrance. The protagonist and Chuzhou emerged from the entrance and landed on the ground, only to be shocked by what they saw. The protagonist exclaimed in disbelief. In just a few days, the place had developed into a small town with transport planes flying overhead. He thought to himself that the infrastructure capabilities of Xia country were truly terrifying. The scene changed again, showing the protagonist slamming all the materials he had gathered from the secret realm onto a table to sell. The receptionist requested him to be gentler, warning that damaging the items would not benefit him. The protagonist smiled and apologized, explaining that he had too many items. If he didn't unload them quickly, it would be difficult for her to finish the appraisal before noon. The receptionist reassured him of their professionalism. Sighing, the protagonist took out his storage ring and began pulling out bag after bag of materials, 5 in total, then announced the 6th as the final one. The receptionist thought to herself that he seemed to be moving goods rather than just making a sale. Awkwardly, she asked if he was done. The protagonist gave her a mischievous smile and confirmed it, urging her to hurry up with the calculations as he still had a lot of spiritual medicine to take out. The scene transitioned to the spiritual medicine appraisal center, where a crowd had gathered around a table laden with colorful, orb-like medicines. People expressed their amazement, claiming that some of the medicines were at least 300 years old. One voice identified a 7-star leaf, explaining that the location where this spiritual medicine grew was extremely hidden, and even professional herbalists had difficulty finding it. Someone marveled at the protagonist's luck in finding a liu flower, an important material for making qi pills. Another appraiser commented that even if all the spiritual medicines were of poor quality, they were still worth at least 30 million yuan. Some noted that certain spiritual medicines were in short supply in the market, which would raise their value even more. They remarked that the warrior must be truly lucky to have become rich overnight. One person addressed Lao Su, insisting that it couldn't have been just luck to collect so many spiritual medicines. Someone so capable should not be underestimated. It became clear that all the individuals present were appraisers. The protagonist observed the commotion and thought that the green and white quality magic cores no longer had any effect on him and couldn't make him stronger. He decided he would exchange them all for money. Reflecting inwardly, he considered his biggest gains came from the 5 blue monster cores of 3rd-level monsters collected during the Beast Tide and a green monster core with golden patterns that had exploded from a 2nd-level king-type demon ghost vine. He pictured that green core vividly in his mind. Ultimately, the protagonist received a total of 27,507,000 yuan. As he left the Spiritual Medicine Appraisal Center, he told himself that the monster cores had been dealt with and now it was time to find a buyer to sell the identified spiritual medicines. Just then, while he was deep in thought, a majestic Rolls-Royce appeared before him. An old man stepped out of the car, assisted by his bodyguard. The old man introduced himself as Li Yushin, the boss of Pink Pharmacy. He mentioned having heard that the protagonist had acquired a large number of spiritual medicines from the secret realm of Redwood Mountain. He inquired if the protagonist would be willing to sell them, offering a price higher than market value. The protagonist found it unsettling that his personal information wasn't confidential, suspecting that someone at the appraisal center had leaked it. Nonetheless, he didn't mind. It was convenient to have someone come to do business with him, sparing him the trouble of seeking out a buyer. After selling all the spiritual medicines, the old man sat back in his car and reminded the protagonist to reach out if he ever obtained more. As the car drove off, the protagonist looked at his phone and noted his bank deposit was now 7,450,064 yuan. Despite the wealth, he felt it didn't compare to a 10% increase in personal strength. True power came from strength, not money. He lamented that general genetic potions and white and green monster cores provided little to no improvement. With a sigh, he thought about how picky the Dimora template was, more so than even himself as its host. High-end items like blood jade fruit and advanced genetic potions were out of his reach. Suddenly, a realization struck him. There was another path: martial arts. He remembered how he had defeated Liu Qingzhu and others in the college entrance exam purely through the abilities granted by the Dimora template. However, when it came to martial arts, he couldn't compare to true martial arts masters. He knew what he needed now was to learn powerful martial arts. In a burst of determination, he ran off and called out to his principal, shouting that he had come to collect gold coins. The scene shifted to the principal's office at Anchang City's #1 middle high school. The principal poured tea for the protagonist and greeted him warmly, placing both hands on the protagonist's shoulders. He expressed his surprise and joy at the visit, noting that the protagonist remained a role model as the top scorer in the college entrance examination. The protagonist, with a polite smile, assured the principal that formalities were unnecessary. The principal insisted otherwise, praising him as a student exemplary in both academics and character. The protagonist then presented a jar of medicinal wine purchased from Mr. Lee of Ping Hall, stating that it wasn't a gift but an expression of honor towards his elder, a fine traditional virtue of Xia country. The principal's eyes sparkled at the sight of the wine, praising the protagonist as a student who respected teachers and excelled academically. Standing up, the protagonist expressed his desire to learn powerful martial arts and asked if the principal had any connections. Since he hadn't entered college yet, he sought help from a martial arts family. The principal reminded him that he had already applied to Huadu University, where he would surely be accepted. He suggested waiting until university to pursue martial arts training, cautioning him against impatience. But the protagonist's eagerness shone through as he stated he truly wanted to improve once more. Moved, the principal agreed to introduce him to someone, noting that as educators, they must adapt to each student's needs. Although he agreed, the expression on his face wasn't entirely cheerful. Whispering, the protagonist affirmed that the principal was right, rules were rigid but people were flexible. He praised the principal for his forward-thinking approach. The principal, delighted by the compliment, beamed and laughed heartily, clearly enjoying the praise. The next scene shifted to the following day at noon. The protagonist was in his room, freshly out of the bath when he received a call. The principal informed him that everything had been arranged and he could now proceed. The protagonist thanked him and asked which martial arts family had been contacted. The answer shocked him. He stammered in disbelief upon learning that the Liu family of Anchang City was willing to teach him their family secrets. The scene then shifted to the outskirts of Anchang City, where a boy and a girl were riding a motorcycle. The girl complimented the boy Jai on his driving skills. Jai bragged that he had something even more impressive. At that moment, the protagonist appeared suddenly in front of them, warning Jai not to be distracted while speeding, as it could make his loved ones cry. The sudden appearance frightened both Jai and the girl. Jai cursed the protagonist, accusing him of being crazy and nearly scaring him to death. He mocked the protagonist for daring to challenge him with a shared bicycle. Jai then sped past on his motorcycle, declaring that no matter the protagonist's status, he was not worthy of being on par with him. The girl cheered for Jai, calling him manly. As smoke trailed from the motorcycle, the protagonist realized they had accelerated and seemed to be challenging him. A massive blue blast erupted behind Jai and the girl, stunning them. The protagonist then overtook them with ease, using his abilities while still riding a mere bicycle. Jai, in shock, had even wet his pants. Bro started flying at one point with his bicycle. They were astonished that a shared bicycle could move so fast, almost like an airplane. The protagonist arrived at his destination, the Liu family mansion, looking at the grand estate, complete with a large garden, water fountain, animal sculptures, and artistic statues. He admired the magnificence befitting a martial arts family. Using his abilities, he sensed several powerful beings within the estate's magnetic field. Miss Liu appeared and greeted the protagonist. He teased her, asking if she was unhappy to see him. She denied it, blushing, and explained that her mother had asked her to come out and greet him. As they walked toward the mansion, servants were seen trimming the garden bushes. Inside, Liu Qingzhu announced the protagonist's arrival to her mother. A graceful woman in a beautiful purple dress and white hair descended the stairs. She welcomed the protagonist warmly. It was Qin Lan, the head of the Liu family. Bro got rizzed by a MILF, and the old man who came out of nowhere also got rizzed up. The protagonist was captivated by her elegance, and so was the old man behind him. Inwardly, the protagonist thought of Prime Minister Cao Cao and finally understood the reference to his notorious fondness for other people's wives.
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe for more awesome content. Please support this new content creator and please leave comments that will motivate me to do more.